Hey guys, tonight we begin with the smell. If you've ever watched a fantasy movie where the hero strolls through a medieval city, you probably noticed the clean cobblestones, the happy merchant selling apples, and the general lack of manure. History is here to tell you that is a lie. Real medieval cities were crowded, dark, dangerous, and smelled like a barnyard that had given up on life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations. You have just walked through the gates of London, or maybe Paris, in the year 1350. The first thing that hits you isn't the majesty of the cathedral or the bustle of commerce. It is a wall of odour so dense you could almost lean against it. You might think you know what bad smells like. Maybe you've walked past a dumpster on a hot day, or sat near the bathroom on a long flight. But medieval urban stench is a different beast entirely. It is a biological weapon. There is no plumbing, there is no garbage collection. There is only the street. And the street is not a road. It is a repository for everything the city doesn't want. You look down at your feet. You are wearing thin leather shoes because you are an average city dweller, and you're standing in mud. Except it's not mud. It is a slurry of animal dung, rotting vegetable scraps, butcher's offal, and the contents of thousands of chamber pots dumped out of windows that morning. The locals call this muck, which is a polite word for toxic sludge. You try to step carefully, but the streets are narrow, terrifyingly narrow. In some places you can touch the buildings on both sides with your arms outstretched. The houses loom over you, built with jetties, upper floors that stick out further than the ground floor to maximise space. This means that as you look up, the sky is just a thin grey sliver. The buildings almost touch at the top, blocking out the sun and trapping the air, and the smell down at street level with you. It is a permanent twilight tunnel of noise and filth, and the noise. Movies make medieval cities sound like lute music and gentle chatter. The reality is a sonic assault. There are no rubber tyres, no asphalt to dampen the sound. Just iron-rimmed cartwheels crashing over uneven stones, metal hammers ringing from the smithy, animals squealing and people shouting. Everyone shouts. The hawkers shout to sell their fish before it rots. The beggars shout for alms. The priest shouts about hellfire. If you are looking for peace and quiet, you have come to the wrong century. You keep walking, trying to find your bearings. You pass a butcher shop. In the modern world, meat is wrapped in plastic and hidden in a refrigerated aisle. Here, the animal is slaughtered right in front of you. The blood flows out of the shop and into a gutter in the middle of the street, where it mixes with everything else. Stray dogs, pigs, and rats swarm the gutter, fighting over the scraps. Yes, pigs. In many medieval cities, pigs are the primary sanitation department. They roam free, eating garbage and waste. They are large, aggressive, and not afraid to bite you if you get between them and a rotting cabbage. You turn a corner and nearly collide with a water carrier. He's hauling buckets from the river or a public conduit. You are thirsty, so you ask for a drink. He looks at you like you're insane. You do not drink the water here. The river is where the tanners wash the hides using urine and toxic chemicals. It is where the dyers dump their vats of blue and red stain. It is where the butchers throw the parts of the cow nobody wants to eat. Drinking that water is playing Russian roulette with your intestines. Instead, you head for a tavern to drink ale. Everyone drinks ale. Men, women, children. It's not because they want to party at 8 a.m. It's because the brewing process boils the water, making it the only fluid likely not to kill you. You enter the tavern. It is dark, smoky, and crowded. The floor is covered in rushes, dried grasses meant to soak up spills. But these rushes aren't changed often. Beneath the top layer of fresh straw lies a composting history of beer, vomit, dog droppings, and food scraps from the last 20 years. It smells of yeast and unwashed bodies. You find a bench and sit down. The person next to you coughs, a wet rattling sound. You scooch away. In a city like this, personal space is a fantasy. You're always touching someone, smelling someone, or breathing their air. Disease doesn't just spread here, it sprints. After your drink, you decide to find a place to sleep. You have rented a room in a tenement. You climb a rickety wooden staircase that feels like it might collapse if you sneeze too hard. Your room is on the 3rd floor. It is tiny, drafty, and you are not alone. You share this room with a family of 5 who are currently weaving cloth in the corner. The loom takes up half the space. The noise is constant. The dust from the wool fills your lungs. You look out the window hoping for fresh air. Bad idea. Down below, a gong farmer is working. This is the brave soul whose job it is to shovel out the cesspits, the holes in the ground where waste collects. He works at night because the smell is too offensive for the daylight hours. He is covered in filth, shoveling the city's waste into a cart to be sold to farmers as fertilizer. It is a necessary job, but watching him makes you reconsider ever eating again. Night falls over the city, and the dynamic changes instantly. In the modern world, the city never sleeps. In the medieval world, the city goes into lockdown. There are no streetlights. When the sun goes down, it is pitch black. The only light comes from the moon or the occasional torch carried by the night watch. And you do not want to be out there. The streets at night belong to the desperate and the dangerous. Thieves, cutthroats, and gangs roam the darkness. If you're caught out after curfew without a light and a good excuse, the watchmen might arrest you, or rob you themselves. Law enforcement is flexible. But the biggest danger at night isn't crime, it's fire. You're living in a city made of wood, straw, and tar. The houses are packed together like matches in a box. Inside, everyone is using candles and open hearths for light and heat. One tipped candle, one stray spark, and the whole neighbourhood goes up. There are no fire trucks, there are just buckets and panic. If a fire starts, the standard procedure is to pull down the houses around the burning one to create a firebreak. Imagine waking up to find your neighbours tearing your house apart with hooks, because the guy next door fell asleep with a lit pipe. You lie down on your straw mattress. It rustles. Something inside it moves. A mouse, a rat, bugs, probably all 3. You pull your wool blanket up to your chin. It scratches. The church bells ring the curfew hour, a mournful, heavy sound that echoes through the wooden canyons of the city. You close your eyes, listening to the shouts of the watchmen, the squeal of the pigs, and the low hum of thousands of people crammed into a square mile of filth and ambition. This is the city. It is the centre of civilization. It is where money is made, where cathedrals are built, where the future is being forged. But right now, lying in the dark, smelling the cesspit and the smoke, it feels less like civilization and more like a survival test that you are currently failing. But let's step back for a moment. Why did anyone live here? Why leave the fresh air of the countryside for this claustrophobic nightmare? Because of town air makes you free. That was the legal principle. If a serf, a peasant bound to the land, could escape to a city and live there for a year and a day without being caught, he was a free man. No more lord, no more forced labour. The city, for all its grime and danger, was the only place where you could reinvent yourself. It was a lottery ticket. You might die of plague, you might burn in a fire, or you might become a wealthy merchant wearing silk and drinking wine from a silver goblet. That was the gamble, and millions of people took it. Now let's peel back the layers of this city even further, because the smell and the noise are just the surface. The real horror of medieval urban life was in the details, the daily grind that wore people down before they turned 30. Let's talk about the food. You think you're buying bread? Maybe. Or maybe you're buying a loaf bull-root up with sawdust, chalk or ground beans because the baker is trying to stretch his profit. The assize of bread. And a lay was a law designed to stop this, punishing bakers who cheated customers. If you were caught selling underweight or tainted bread, you could be dragged through the streets on a hurdle with the offending loaf tied around your neck. It was public humiliation as consumer protection. And the meat? In a city without refrigeration, fresh is a relative term. Spices weren't just for flavour, they were a preservative and a mask. If the venison smells a little off, drown it in peppercorns and garlic. If the pork is turning grey, salt it until it's stiff as a board. You eat what you can get and you pray your stomach is stronger than the bacteria. Then there are the animals. We mentioned the pigs, but the city is also full of horses, donkeys, oxen, chickens and geese. It is a farm squeezed into an alleyway. And when these animals die, they aren't always carted away immediately. A dead horse might lie in the street for days, bloating in the sun until the knackers, the men who process animal carcasses, get around to it. The smell of decomposition is just another note in the city's perfume, But the most terrifying thing about the medieval city isn't the filth or the fire, it's the crowd. In a time before germ theory, a crowd is a death trap. When the plague arrives, and it always arrives, the city becomes a tomb. There is no escape. The walls that keep invaders out also keep the infection in. You watch your neighbours fall ill, their doors marked with a cross. The carts rumble through the streets at night, the drivers calling, "Bring out your dead." And you realise that this bustling, vibrant, money-making machine is also a grinder of human lives. Yet despite it all, the city endures. It grows. It rebuilds after every fire, every plague. Because humans are social creatures, and apparently we prefer the stench of opportunity to the silence of the fields. Now let's pivot. Let's leave the muddy streets of London and travel south, back in time, to a place that makes medieval London look like a quaint village. A place where the engineering was genius, the ambition was limitless, and the daily life was absolutely insane. We're going to the Colosseum, but not the one you see on postcards. We're going to the hidden underbelly, the machine beneath the blood. Because while the medieval peasant was worrying about mud, the Romans were worrying about how to lift a live tiger 20 feet into the air while an orchestra played. If you think the Colosseum was just a pile of stone where people fought, you're missing the point. The Colosseum wasn't a building, it was a machine, a massive industrial slaughter factory designed to turn death into theatre. And you aren't sitting in the Emperor's box eating grapes. You're down in the Hypogeum, the underground labyrinth beneath the arena floor. Welcome to Hell's basement. It is hot down here, suffocatingly hot. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, sawdust, oil torches, and the musk of wild animals that are very confused and very angry. Above your head is a wooden floor covered in sand. On top of that floor are 50,000 screaming Romans stomping their feet. Dust and sand constantly drift down through the cracks in the ceiling, coating your skin, your hair, and your lungs. It is loud, dark, and terrifying. Your job is the elevator. Yes, the Romans had elevators, dozens of them, but they weren't powered by electricity. They were powered by you. You and 7 other men are shirtless, sweating, and pushing a massive wooden capstan, a horizontal wheel, around and around in the dark. As you push, ropes tighten, pulleys scream, and a cage containing a 400-pound lion slowly rises toward the ceiling. This isn't a smooth ride. The cage jerks and sways. The lion is roaring, thrashing against the bars just a few feet from your face. If the rope snaps, the cage falls, the lion gets loose, and your shift ends very abruptly. If you push too slowly, the stage manager whips you. If you push too fast, the counterweight jams. It is a high-stress environment with zero job security. There are over 25 of these elevators working simultaneously. It is a symphony of coordinated mechanics. At a signal, probably a blast of a trumpet that you can barely hear over the crowd, trapdoors above snap open. The cages reach the top. The animals are released. From the perspective of the crowd above, it looks like magic. One moment the arena is empty. The next, it is filled with tigers, bears and wolves appearing from the ground itself. They cheer for the spectacle. Down here, you just wipe the sweat from your eyes and prepare to lower the cage for the next load. But the elevators are just one part of this nightmare. The corridors of the Hypogeum are narrow and crowded. You have to squeeze past gladiators who are pacing nervously, oiling their skin, checking their weapons. These aren't the stoic heroes of the movies. They are men who are about to go upstairs and possibly die. Some are praying, some are vomiting from nerves, some are boasting loudly to hide their fear. The smell of adrenaline is palpable. Then there are the scenery shifters. The Emperor wants a jungle scene today? Fine. You and 50 others have to haul massive fake trees and painted backdrops up narrow ramps, hoist them through the floor and set them up in minutes. Then, when the hunt is over, you have to drag them back down, slippery with blood, so they can set up for the next act. It is backstage chaos on a scale modern theatre can't even imagine. And let's talk about the noise again. The roar of the crowd above is constant, a low, thrumming vibration that you feel in your teeth. But when something big happens, a famous gladiator falls or a criminal is executed, the noise changes. It becomes a physical weight pressing down on the floorboards. You learn to read the battle by the sound of the feet above you. A collective gasp? Someone got hurt? A rhythmic? Chanting? They want to kill. Silence. The Emperor is deciding. Eventually the games end. The crowd leaves. But your day isn't over. Now comes the cleanup. The sand above, the arena, has to be raked and replaced. The bodies have to be dragged down the gate of death. The animals that survived have to be caged and fed. The animals that didn't survive have to be butchered. The hypogeum becomes a slaughterhouse. By the time you stumble out into the Roman night, you're covered in grime, soot and fluids you don't want to identify. You need a bath. Desperately. And lucky for you, Rome is famous for them. The Roman baths are the pinnacle of civilization, right? Marble halls, heated floors, crystal clear water. Well, hold on, because history is about to ruin that fantasy too. You walk to the local thermae. It looks magnificent from the outside. Pillars, statues, steam rising into the cool air. You enter the changing room, the apoditerium, and strip off your tunic. You stuff your clothes into a cubbyhole and hope the slave watching the door is honest, because theft here is rampant. If you come back and your tunic is gone, you're walking home naked. It happens every day. You move into the tepidarium, the warm room, to acclaim it. It's crowded. You're shoulder to shoulder with senators, soldiers, merchants, and slaves. Rome is a hierarchy, but in the nude, everyone looks surprisingly similar. You sit on a bench and start to sweat. This is the cleaning process. You don't use soap. Soap is for barbarians. You use oil. You slather yourself in olive oil until you glisten like a Greek wrestler. Then you use a strigil, a curved metal tool, to scrape the oil, dirt, and dead skin off your body. It sounds effective, and it is, mostly. But then you look at the floor, the scrapings of hundreds of men, oil, hair, sweat, skin, are slick on the tiles. Slaves hurry around with buckets of water, splashing it away, but the smell, it's the smell of a locker room that hasn't been deep cleaned in 300 years. Now you move to the caldarium, the hot bath. The water is steaming. It looks inviting. You step in. But wait. There is no chlorine. There are no pumps. This water is stagnant. It is changed maybe once a day, if that. And hundreds of people have been in here before you. People with open wounds, people with skin diseases, people who didn't wipe properly. You are essentially sitting in a lukewarm soup of humanity. Roman doctors actually argued about this. Some said the baths were healing. Others, like the physician Celsus, noticed that if you went to the baths with a small cut, you often came home with gangrene. They didn't know about germs, but they knew that the water was suspicious. And it's not just the water. The baths are a social hub. People are eating snacks in the pool, sausages, pastries, nuts. Crumbs float past you. A man is getting a massage on a slab nearby, groaning loudly as his knuckles are cracked. Another man is having his armpit hair plucked by a slave, a very popular and very painful Roman grooming trend. The plucker is shouting to advertise his services. The plucky is screaming in pain. It is chaotic, loud, and aggressively intimate. But the frigidarium, the cold plunge, is where you really wake up. You jump into the icy water to close your pores. It shocks the system. You feel clean, invigorated. You ignore the scum line on the edge of the pool. You towel off, get dressed. Thankfully your tunic wasn't stolen. And step back out into the city. You feel civilized. You feel Roman. You have survived the underground. You have bathed in the communal soup. And now you're ready for the rest of your life. But what is that life? If you are a teenager in Rome, your life is about to get very complicated. Because being young in the ancient world wasn't about finding yourself. It was about surviving expectations that would crush a modern adult. Let's rewind the clock and look at growing up. You are 14. In the modern world, your biggest worry is algebra and acne. In Rome, you are considered an adult. If you are a boy, you have just swapped your toga praetexta, the purple-bordered toga of childhood, for the toga virilis, the plain white toga of manhood. It is a massive ceremony. Your family watches. You sacrifice to the gods. You shave your face for the first time, even if there's only peach fuzz there, and offer the hair to the deities. Congratulations, you are a man. Now get a job. There is no gap year. There is no university for self-discovery. You're expected to follow your father. If he is a senator, you're now learning rhetoric, law, and how to bribe people without getting caught. You follow him to the forum, standing silently behind him while he argues about taxes. You are learning the family business, power. If your father is a baker, you are now baking. You're up at 3 a.m, covered in flour, hauling sacks of grain that weigh as much as you do. Your childhood is over. The concept of play is now a memory. But if you are a girl, it's a different story, and a much shorter one. You don't get a toga ceremony, you get a wedding. The legal age for marriage for girls in Rome is 12. 12. Most waited until 14 or 15, but the pressure starts early. You aren't marrying for love. You're marrying because your father needs a political alliance with the guy who owns the olive groves next door. You're a bargaining chip in a dress. On your wedding day, you offer your childhood toys, your dolls, your ball, to the household gods. It is a symbolic gesture that says, I am done playing. You leave your father's house and enter your husband's, and he might be 30 years older than you. He might be a stranger. Your job is simple. Run the household and produce heirs. If you are wealthy, you're managing slaves, accounts, and dinner parties. You are the CEO of the house. It is a position of power, yes, but it is a fragile one. If you can't have children, you can be divorced. If you spend too much money, you can be divorced. If you drink wine, which was strictly forbidden for women in early Rome because it might lead to immorality, you could, in theory, be killed by your husband. Though by the Empire days, most women drank wine and nobody cared, as long as they didn't do it in the Senate. But let's look at the rebellion. Did Roman teenagers rebel? Did they sneak out? Did they hate their parents? Absolutely. Human nature doesn't change, only the consequences do. We have graffiti from Pompeii that proves teenagers have always been teenagers. Messages scratched into walls like Secundus was here, or I love Claudia, or crude drawings of, well, anatomy. They hung out at the baths, they gambled with dice in the back alleys, they formed gangs. There were the chariot hooligans, young men who obsessed over chariot racing teams, the greens, the blues, the reds, the whites. They dressed in their team's colours, got into fistfights with rival fans, and generally acted like modern soccer hooligans but with more daggers. And then there were the skinheads of Rome, wealthy young aristocrats who roamed the streets at night, beating up people for fun. Even the Emperor Nero, when he was young, used to put on a disguise and go out attacking people in the streets. Imagine the President of the United States putting on a hoodie and mugging people. That was Rome. So you navigate the minefield of Roman adolescence. You survive the baths, the expectations, the street violence, but there is one thing you cannot escape: the superstition. The Romans were obsessed with luck, not just fingers-crossed luck. We are talking about a civilization that wouldn't walk out the door without checking if the chickens were eating. Every aspect of daily life was governed by invisible rules. You wake up, you must put your right sandal on first. Left is unlucky. The word sinister comes from the Latin word for left. If you trip over the threshold leaving your house, go back inside. The day is ruined. Start over. You walk down the street. You see a black dog. Is it a good omen or a bad one? Depends on where it's looking. You hear an owl hoot. Terrifying. Owls were symbols of impending death. If an owl flew into the capital, the entire Senate might suspend business to scrub the floors with sulphur and water to purify the bad vibes. And then there are the curses. If you hate your neighbour, you don't just sue him. You write a curse tablet. You take a thin sheet of lead, scratch a nasty message on it. May Orcus eat his liver. May his horses go lame. May he never perform in bed. Roll it up and throw it into a well or a tomb. We have found thousands of these. It was the ancient version of a one-star review, but delivered to the underworld. You live in a world where everything has a meaning. A sneeze, a stumble, a bird flying the wrong way. It is exhausting. You're constantly negotiating with the universe, trying not to offend a god you forgot existed. But let's say you survive all of this. You make it through the filth of the medieval city, the engineering terrors of the Colosseum, the bacteria soup of the baths, and the minefield of Roman adolescence. You might think you've seen the worst of history. You would be wrong, because now we are going to talk about something colder, something harder, something that makes Roman concrete look like a pillow. We are going north, to the Vikings. But we aren't talking about their raids. We aren't talking about their axes. We are talking about their ships, and specifically, a mystery that has baffled people for centuries. How did they cross the freezing, icy Atlantic in open boats without freezing to death? They didn't have cabins. They didn't have heaters. They had an open deck, the freezing spray of the North Sea, and weeks of nothing but grey water. How did they stay warm? The answer involves fish oil, wool, and a sleeping bag that required you to get extremely comfortable with your friends. Imagine standing on a wooden deck that is constantly moving beneath your feet. The horizon is grey, the water is grey, the sky is grey, and the temperature is hovering just above freezing. You are wet. You have been wet for 3 weeks. and you know with absolute certainty that you won't be dry for another 3. Welcome to the Viking longship. Movies show Vikings standing proudly at the prow, wind in their hair, looking majestic. In reality, they were huddled under woolen cloaks, trying desperately not to die of hypothermia. These ships were engineering marvels, fast, flexible, able to cross oceans, but they had one fatal flaw for the passengers. They were completely open to the elements. There is no below deck. There is no cabin. There is just the deck you stand on and the bilges below where the water collects. If it rains, you get wet. If a wave crashes over the side, you get soaked. If the wind blows, and in the North Atlantic the wind always blows, it cuts right through you. So, how did they heat the ship? They didn't. You can't build a fire on a wooden deck coated in tar and pitch unless you want to turn your transport into a Viking funeral before you're even dead. They had a small box of sand where they might manage a tiny sputtering fire for cooking if the sea was dead calm. But the North Atlantic is never dead calm. This means no hot food. For weeks, you're eating stockfish, cod that has been dried in the wind until it has the consistency of wood shingles. You have to beat it with a hammer before you can chew it. You wash it down with sour whey or water that has been sitting in a barrel for a month, slowly growing its own ecosystem. But the real challenge is sleeping. You can't just lie on the deck, you'd freeze. So the Vikings invented the hudfat. It sounds like an insult, but it was a lifesaver. It was a large sleeping bag made of leather, treated with fish oil to make it waterproof. But here is the catch. It wasn't a single sleeping bag. It was a communal one. You and 2 or 3 other burly, unwashed, wet Vikings crawl into this leather sack together. You share body heat. It is intimate, it is claustrophobic, and it smells like rancid oil and 3 weeks of sweat. But it is warm. Inside that bag, the temperature rises. Outside, the spray freezes on the rigging. Inside, you survive, and you sleep in shifts. While you're in the bag, someone else is bailing water, steering or watching for icebergs. When they wake you up to take your turn, you crawl out of the warm, stinking leather into the biting wind, your clothes instantly stiffening as the damp wool freezes. You realise that exploration isn't about glory, it's about endurance. It's about being wet, cold and miserable for longer than anyone else is willing to be. Now, let's leave the ocean and step back onto dry land. You might think, finally, I can get warm. But if you are a peasant in medieval Europe during the Little Ice Age, a period of time when temperatures dropped significantly, you're in for a rude awakening. Winter on land is a different kind of monster. You live in a hut. We call it a cottage, to make it sound cute. It is not cute. It is a single room with a dirt floor. The walls are wattle and daub, woven sticks covered in mud. As winter sets in, the mud cracks. The wind whistles through your walls. You spend your days stuffing moss and old rags into the gaps, fighting a losing battle against the draft. But the real enemy is the night. The sun goes down at 4 p.m. It won't come up until 8 a.m. That is 16 hours of darkness and cold. You have a central hearth, a fire pit in the middle of the room. But remember, there is no chimney. The smoke rises and hangs in the rafters. If you stand up, you choke. If you sit down, you freeze. You learn to live in the smoke zone, crouching low, your eyes constantly stinging, your lungs slowly turning black. This smoke has a purpose, though. It hardens the thatched roof from the inside, killing bugs and preventing rot. It also coats your meat hanging from the rafters. Everything you eat tastes like smoke. You smell like smoke. Your clothes smell like smoke. If you travelled to the modern world, people would think you were on fire. To survive the night, you employ the ultimate medieval heating system, biology. You bring the animals inside. Yes, the cow comes in. The pigs come in. The chickens roost in the corner. You might think this is disgusting, and from a modern hygienic perspective, it is a nightmare. The floor becomes a mix of mud and manure. The smell of ammonia is sharp enough to make your eyes water, but a cow is a 1,000-pound radiator. It breathes out warm, moist air. Its body radiates heat. A pig is a fuzzy space heater. The temperature in the hut rises by 10, maybe 15 degrees just because the barnyard moved into the living room. You sleep to the sound of chewing cud and the occasional snort. You learn to ignore the smell because the smell means life. And then there is the bed. You don't have a private room. The whole family, parents, children, grandparents, sleeps in one massive bed. It's usually a wooden frame with ropes woven across it, hence the phrase sleep tight. You had to tighten the ropes when they sagged. On top is a mattress stuffed with straw. You all pile in. It's called bundling. You wear your wool clothes because taking them off means freezing. You wear a nightcap because heat escapes through your head. You pack together like sardines. The body heat creates a microclimate under the heavy wool blankets, but sleep isn't a continuous 8-hour block. In the medieval world, sleep happened in 2 shifts. You go to bed when it gets dark. You sleep for about 4 hours. This is the first sleep. Then, around midnight, you wake up. The whole world wakes up. The family stirs. You might tend the fire. You might check on the animals. You might pray. Neighbours might visit. It is a quiet, magical hour in the middle of the night where the world belongs to the awake. Philosophers write, lovers, well, do what lovers do. Then, after an hour or so, you go back to sleep for the second sleep until dawn. This broken sleep pattern was normal for centuries. It wasn't insomnia, it was just life. But let's talk about the morning. You wake up. It is freezing. There is ice on the inside of the water bucket. You have to break it to get a drink. You don't wash. Why would you? Washing removes the oils from your skin. Those oils, combined with a layer of dirt, actually help insulate you. Being clean in the winter is a death sentence. You want that layer of grime. It's your armour. You eat your pottage, that eternal stew that has been simmering for days. It's warm, it's thick, and it coats your stomach. Then you go out to work. If you are a peasant, winter isn't a break. You're fixing fences, threshing grain in the barn, or cutting wood. Cutting wood is an obsession. You need wood to cook, wood to heat, wood to fix the house. If you run out of wood in February, you die. It is that simple. You look at the forest not as nature, but as fuel. And while you are freezing in the field, hacking at a frozen log, you might look up at the castle on the hill and think, I bet the Lord is warm. He is. But he has his own problems. Because while you're fighting the cold, he is fighting the siege. Castles are designed to keep people out, but that also means they keep people in. And when an army surrounds you, the castle stops being a home and starts being a prison. Let's debunk the Hollywood siege. In movies, a siege is 5 minutes of catapults, a cool ladder scene, and then sword fighting. In reality, a siege is months of boredom, starvation and disease, punctuated by moments of sheer technological horror. You're inside the castle. The enemy has surrounded the walls. They aren't attacking. They are just sitting there, waiting. They have cut off the water. They have burned the fields. They are waiting for you to get hungry. And you do. The grain runs out. The salted meat runs out. You start looking at the horses differently, then the dogs, then the rats. But the enemy isn't just starving you. They are playing mind games. They build trebuchets, massive counterweight catapults. But they don't just throw rocks. They throw dead things. You're standing on the battlements, weak from hunger, when a projectile comes flying over the wall. It lands with a wet thud in the courtyard. It's a dead horse, or a cow, or, in some horrific cases, the severed heads of your messengers that you sent out to ask for help. Why throw a dead horse? Biological warfare. The carcass rots. It attracts flies. It spreads disease. If the enemy can get plague into your castle, they don't need to climb the walls. They just have to wait for you to die. And then there are the miners. You're sleeping in the keep, and you hear a faint tap, tap, tap coming from beneath the floor. They are digging under the walls. They are digging a tunnel supported by wooden beams. Once they get under the tower, they will fill the tunnel with pig fat and set it on fire. The beams burn, the tunnel collapses, and the tower falls into the hole. This is the mine. To stop it, you have to dig a countermine. You dig your own tunnel, hoping to break into theirs. And when you do, it is a nightmare. Fighting in a dark, cramping tunnel, underground with pickaxes and daggers, screaming in the dark while the earth shakes above you. It is claustrophobic, brutal combat where no one can hear you scream. But let's assume the walls hold. The enemy gets impatient. They bring up the siege tower, a massive wooden skyscraper on wheels covered in wet animal hides to stop fire arrows. It rolls toward the wall, creaking, filled with soldiers. You are on the wall. You have one job: stop it. You don't use a sword, you use gravity. You drop rocks. You drop boiling water. But the most terrifying weapon: heated sand. Hollywood loves boiling oil, but oil is expensive. You don't waste oil on soldiers. You use sand. You heat sand in great iron cauldrons until it is red hot. Then you dump it over the side. The sand gets into the armour. It gets into the joints. It burns its way down to the skin and stays there. You cannot wipe it off. It is agony. Soldiers rip off their own armour to escape it, exposing themselves to arrows. If you survive the siege, if the enemy gives up and goes home, you haven't won glory. You have won the right to eat a rat without guilt and sleep without listening for digging. But let's move away from the violence of war and look at something more insidious. Something that killed more people than swords, sieges, or cold winters combined. We are going to talk about medicine. Because in the medieval and ancient world, going to the doctor was often more dangerous than the disease. If you felt sick, you didn't get a pill. You got a theory that usually involved sharp objects and a fundamental misunderstanding of how the human body works. You wake up with a headache, a throbbing pain behind your eyes. You go to the local healer or the barber surgeon. He looks at you, touches your forehead, and nods gravely. Too much blood, he says. This is the theory of the four humours, the idea that your body is a balance of four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you are sick, it's because you have too much of one. Fever, too much blood, which is hot. Depression, too much black bile, which is cold. So the solution is always subtraction. He pulls out a lancet, a small double-edged blade. He doesn't sterilise it. He wipes it on his apron, which is stiff with the dried blood of the last 50 patients. He ties a tourniquet around your arm to make the vein pop, and then slice. He bleeds you into a bowl. He watches the blood flow, looking for impurities. He might take a pint, maybe two. You start to feel dizzy. It's working, he says. You aren't getting better. You're going into shock. But the fainting feels like relief, so you pay him. If bleeding doesn't work, maybe you need a hole in your head. This is trepanation. It is one of the oldest surgical procedures in human history. If you have migraines, epilepsy, or mental illness, the doctor might decide that you have evil spirits or bad air trapped in your skull. The solution: drill a hole to let them out. You're held down by assistants. There is no anaesthesia. Maybe a piece of wood to bite on. The doctor uses a hand drill to bore through your skull until he exposes the brain. Surprisingly, many people survived this. The bone heals. We have found skulls with multiple healed holes. These people went back for seconds. But what if your problem is internal? What if you have a stomachache? Well, get ready for the clister. This is the medieval enema, a metal syringe the size of a trombone, filled with a mixture of water, salt, herbs, and sometimes boar's bile. The doctor or the apothecary administers it. It is not dignified. It is not private. It was a standard medical procedure, performed on kings and peasants alike. Louis XIV of France reportedly had over 2,000 of them during his reign. He would hold court while receiving one. That is a level of confidence or lack of boundaries that is hard to comprehend. And then there are the medicines themselves. You aren't taking aspirin, you're taking mummy powder. Yes, actual mummies. Europeans ground up ancient Egyptian mummies and ate them. They believed the bitumen used in the embalming process healed everything from bruises to stomach ulcers. It created a massive trade in corpse smuggling. You might be eating a pharaoh, or you might be eating a peasant from Cairo that someone dried out in the sun last week. Or perhaps you need a cure for a cough. Try syrup of snails, or for a fever, a split pigeon applied to the feet. The logic is magical, not biological. If a plant looks like a liver, hepatica, it must cure the liver. If a walnut looks like a brain, it cures headaches. It is the doctrine of signatures. It makes poetic sense, but unfortunately, bacteria do not care about poetry. You realise that surviving an illness in history is largely a matter of surviving the cure. If your immune system can fight off the flu and the blood loss, and the mercury poisoning from the medicine, you are invincible. But there is one aspect of life we haven't touched on yet. One that is perhaps the most terrifying because it is inescapable. We have talked about the city, the cold, the war, and the doctor. But what about the mind? What about the beliefs that kept people awake at night? Because when the candle burns low and the shadows stretch across the room, the medieval person isn't just afraid of the dark, they are afraid of what lives in it. The night is not empty, it is crowded. You blow out the candle. It's a tallow candle made from animal fat, so it smells like burning beef and dirty socks when it dies. And then, the darkness hits you. Modern humans have forgotten what darkness is. We have streetlights, LEDs, glowing phone screens. We live in a permanent grey twilight. But in the medieval world, when the light goes out, it is absolute. It is a physical weight pressing against your eyes. You cannot see your hand in front of your face. The room you know so well suddenly feels vast, unfamiliar, and hostile. You lie in the dark, listening. The house creaks. It's just wood settling as the temperature drops, right? Or is it something else? In the medieval mind, the night is not empty. The night is a kingdom ruled by things that hate you. You are terrified of the devil. Not the abstract, metaphorical devil of modern theology. You are afraid of a physical, literal trickster who might be hiding in your butter churn. If the butter won't form, it's a demon. If the milk sours, a witch looked at it. If you trip on a root in the forest, it wasn't clumsiness. It was a sprite trying to break your neck. You drift into sleep, but then you wake up. You can't move. You can't breathe. There is a heavy weight on your chest, crushing the air out of your lungs. You try to scream, but no sound comes out. You can see a dark shape sitting on top of you, staring with glowing eyes. Today we call this sleep paralysis. It's a glitch in the brain where you wake up before your body's paralysis mode turns off. It's terrifying, but it's biological. To you, the medieval peasant, this is the mare, the night hag, or maybe an incubus, a demon sitting on your chest trying to steal your breath or your soul. You lie there in paralyzed terror waiting to die, until suddenly your body wakes up and the shape vanishes. You don't think, ow, my brain is weird. You think, I just fought a demon and survived. You tell your neighbours the next day. They nod. It happened to them last week. The supernatural isn't a story. It is a neighbour. And if the house is scary, the forest is worse. In movies, the forest is a place of adventure. You go for a hike. You meet a wizard. In reality, the forest is the wilderness. It is the place where the laws of man stop and the laws of nature and something older begin. You don't go into the deep woods unless you have to. The woods are where the outlaws live. Men who have been outlawed, meaning they have no legal protection. Anyone can kill them without penalty. They're essentially human wolves. And then there are the actual wolves, and bears, and boars. A wild boar is a 300-pound tank with razors on its face and a bad attitude. If you meet one, you climb a tree or you die. But beyond the animals, the woods are the domain of the fair folk. And forget Tinkerbell. The fairies of folklore are sociopaths. They steal children and replace them with changelings. Sickly, screaming things that drain the mother's life. They dance in circles that, if you step into them, will trap you for 100 years. You don't walk past a mushroom ring without making the sign of the cross. You don't whistle in the woods at night. You keep your head down, your knife loose, and you walk fast. But let's say you survive the demons, the night hag, and the fairies. You make it to morning. You head into town. But today isn't a work day. Today is a legal day. You have been accused of a crime. Maybe you stole a chicken. Maybe you owe money. Or maybe your neighbour just doesn't like you. Welcome to the medieval justice system. It makes the DMV look like a spa day. There is no innocent until proven guilty. There is no DNA evidence. There is no CCTV. There is just, he said, she said. And when the judge can't decide who is lying, they turn to the ultimate authority, God. This is the trial by ordeal. The logic is simple. God protects the innocent. So, if we torture you, and you don't get hurt, or you heal nicely, God loves you, and you didn't do it. If you get hurt or infected, guilty, hang him. Let's look at the menu of options. First, the ordeal by water. You're tied up, left thumb to right thumb to left toe, so you are a human ball. Then, they throw you into a pond that has been blessed by a priest. If you sink, the water, which is pure, has accepted you. You are innocent. Hooray! Now they just have to fish you out before you drown. If you float, the water has rejected you. You're guilty. They pull you out and then execute you. It is a no-win scenario where your best hope is near drowning. If that sounds too wet for you, try the ordeal by fire. You have to walk 9 paces carrying a red-hot iron bar, or maybe you have to walk blindfolded over red-hot ploughshares. Your hands, or feet, are burned. Obviously. The skin blisters immediately. The smell of searing flesh fills the courtroom. But the trial isn't over. A priest bandages your hand. They seal the bandage with wax. Then you go to a cell for 3 days. After 3 days, they unwrap the hand. If the wound is healing cleanly, it's a miracle. Innocent. If the wound is festering, pus-filled, or infected, God has judged you. Guilty. Think about that. Your legal standing depends on your immune system and the cleanliness of the priest's bandages. Given that germs are everywhere, you are almost certainly going to get an infection. So you burn your hand, suffer for 3 days in a dirty cell, find out your hand is rotting, and then they hang you. Justice served. And finally, there is the ordeal by combat. This is the one Hollywood loves. 2 knights fighting for honour. But usually it's not knights, it's regular people, and it's messy. If a woman accuses a man, there are special rules to make it fair. The man is put in a waist-deep hole. He's given a club. The woman is free to move around the hole. She's given a rock wrapped in a cloth, basically a flail. He tries to hit her. She tries to bash his head in. It is brutal, undignified, and usually ends with someone dead or maimed. But let's say you are convicted. You failed the ordeal. Now comes the punishment. Medieval people did not believe in rehabilitation. They believed in deterrence. They wanted to make sure that everyone who saw you remembered not to do what you did. If you are a gossip, usually a woman who speaks out of turn, you get the scold's bridle. This is a metal cage that goes over your head. Inside the mouth there is a metal plate, sometimes with spikes, that presses down on your tongue. You cannot speak. You're led through the town on a chain like a dog, while people jeer and throw things at you. If you are a baker who sold small loaves, you get the pillory. Your head and hands are locked in a wooden frame in the market square. You have to stand there for hours. It sounds funny until you realise the crowd is allowed to throw things. Rotten vegetables? Sure. Dead rats? Maybe. Stones? Sometimes. People died in the pillory because the crowd got too enthusiastic. But if you commit a serious crime, treason, murder, heresy, you meet the executioner. The executioner is a fascinating figure. He is a professional. He is paid by the city, but he is also a social outcast. No one will touch him. No one will eat with him. He often has to live outside the city walls. He is unclean because he deals in death. But he is also a healer. This is the dark irony of history. The executioner knows anatomy better than the doctor. He knows exactly where the vertebrae are for beheading. He knows how much force breaks a bone for the wheel. So people secretly go to the executioner for medical advice. He sets bones. He treats skin diseases with, well, let's just say human byproducts. Crowds gather to watch him work. Executions are the Super Bowl of the Middle Ages. Families bring picnics. Vendors sell pastries. People bet on how long the victim will last. If you are a noble, you get the sword. You kneel. You pray. Whack. It's over. Dignified. If you're a commoner, you get the rope. Hanging. But not the long drop that breaks your neck instantly. That was invented much later. This is the short drop. You just strangle. It takes minutes. You dance on the air. The crowd cheers. And if you are a traitor, the worst of the worst, you get hanged, drawn and quartered. I won't go into the full graphic detail, but let's just say it involves being half strangled, taken down while still alive, and then watching the executioner remove parts of you that you really, really need, before finally, mercifully, being chopped into 4 pieces. It was theatre of cruelty. It was the state saying, "We own your body, even in death." You watch this spectacle. You smell the blood. You hear the cheers. And you realise something profound about the past. Life is cheap. Suffering is public. And empathy is a luxury that most people cannot afford. But as you walk away from the scaffold, shaking the image from your head, you hear a sound that is even more terrifying than the executioner's axe. A cough. Not a throat-clearing cough. A deep, wet, rattling cough coming from a beggar sitting against the wall. He looks up. His eyes are red. There is a dark, swollen lump on his neck the size of an egg. You freeze. The crowd freezes. The execution is forgotten. Because this isn't just a sick man. This is the end of the world. This is the plague. And unlike the executioner who kills one man at a time, the plague is coming for everyone. The city gates are locked. But it's too late. The rat is already inside the granary. The flea is already in the straw. You go home. You lock your door. You light your fire. But you know it doesn't matter. The invisible enemy is here. Let's talk about the Black Death. Not the statistics. Not the 1/3 of Europe died textbook line. Let's talk about what it felt like to watch your world dissolve into pus and panic. It starts with a fever. You feel tired. Your joints ache. You think, maybe I just worked too hard in the fields. Then the swelling starts. The buboes, groin, armpits, neck. Black painful swellings that ooze blood and pus. The smell is horrific. It is the smell of the body decomposing while the person is still alive. Doctors are useless. They tell you to sniff flowers. They tell you to sit in a sewer because bad air drives out bad air. They tell you to kill all the cats and dogs, which was a terrible idea because the rats then exploded in population. People start to panic. Parents abandon children. Husbands abandon wives. Priests refuse to give last rites because they are terrified of catching it. The social contract, the invisible glue that holds humanity together, snaps. You look out your window. The carts are rolling. Bring out your dead. They are piling bodies like firewood. There are no funerals. There are no bells. There are just mass graves, pits dug in the frozen earth, filled with layers of neighbours, friends and family. Some people turn to hedonism. We're going to die tomorrow, so let's drink everything today. They break into abandoned houses where the dead owners' clothes drink their wine and dance until they collapse. Others turn to fanaticism, the flagellants. Lines of men marching through towns, whipping themselves with scourges tipped with iron, chanting, trying to bleed enough to make God stop the punishment. You're sitting in your room. You check your own neck. Is that a lump or just a gland? You check your children. You hold your breath every time someone coughs. This is the psychological horror of the pandemic. It's not just the dying, it's the waiting. But amazingly, humanity survives. The plague burns itself out. The survivors emerge, and they find a changed world. There are fewer people, which means labour is scarce, which means for the first time in history the peasant has power. You want me to plough your field, my lord? Pay me double. The feudal system begins to crack. The horror of the plague actually plants the seeds of the Renaissance. History is strange like that. It grows flowers on graves. So you survived the plague, you survived the executioner, you even survived the doctor, you deserve a reward. And what is the ultimate medieval reward? The feast. In movies, the medieval banquet is a glamorous affair. Long tables groaning with fresh fruit, roasted boars with apples in their mouths and goblets of wine, all lit by the soft glow of chandeliers. Everyone is clean, everyone is laughing, and the music is delightful. Reality would like to have a word, and that word is Greece. You enter the great hall. It is impressive, high-ceilinged and hung with tapestries. But the tapestries aren't just for decoration. They are there to stop the freezing draughts coming through the stone walls. Even with them, the hall is draughty. The massive fireplace roasts the people sitting next to it and leaves everyone else shivering. If you are sitting in the middle of the table, your front is sweating while your back is slowly turning into ice. You sit on a bench. There are no chairs. Chairs are for important people. You are not important. You are below the salt. This is a crucial piece of medieval social geography. A massive, ornate salt cellar sits in the middle of the head table. If you are seated above the salt, near the Lord, you get the good food, the good wine, and the salt. If you are below the salt, you get the dregs. You get the wine that tastes like vinegar, you get the meat that is mostly gristle, and you definitely do not get flavour. You look for your cutlery, you find a knife. That's it. There are no forks. The fork is a suspicious Italian invention that won't become popular for centuries. God gave you fingers. Use them. You do have a spoon, but you probably brought it with you. Most people carried their own spoon in a belt pouch because trusting a host to provide a clean one was naive. And you don't have a plate. You have a trencher. This is a thick, stale slab of bread cut from a loaf that was baked specifically to be hard. It acts as an edible plate. The sauces, the grease, and the blood from the meat soak into the bread. You do not eat the trencher. Not yet. That is for the poor. After the meal, the soggy, gravy-soaked bread will be gathered up and given to the beggars at the gate. If you eat your trencher during the meal, you are signalling that you are starving and have zero manners. Now the food arrives, and it is theatrical. Medieval lords didn't care about taste as much as they cared about awe. They wanted food that looked impossible. They served peacocks that had been skinned, roasted, and then dressed back up in their own feathers, so they looked alive on the platter. It looked amazing. It tasted like dry, stringy turkey. They served the cockentrice. This is a culinary Frankenstein monster, where the front half of a pig is sewn onto the back half of a turkey, or capon, and the whole thing is roasted. It is a crime against nature served with a side of mustard. But the real issue is freshness. There are no refrigerators. There is no ice. The meat has been salted, smoked, or dried. If it's fresh, it means the animal was slaughtered this morning in the courtyard, and the kitchen staff has been rushing to cook it before it turns, to mask the taste of meat that is slightly past its prime. The cooks use spices, heavy spices. Ginger, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, pepper. They use them in quantities that would blow your head off today. everything is sweet and spicy. Savoury wasn't really a category. They put sugar on fish. They put cinnamon on beef. It is a flavour profile that can best be described as confused gingerbread house. And vegetables. Peasants eat vegetables, nobles eat meat. If you are rich, you believe that raw vegetables cause disease. Fruit is only safe if it is cooked into a paste. So, you're eating a diet of 90% protein and starch. The result? Gout, kidney stones, and constipation so severe it was a common cause of death among the aristocracy. But let's get back to the table manners. You're eating with your hands. You reach into the communal dish. Yes, communal. You're sharing a bowl of stew with the 3 people sitting next to you. You watch the man to your left. He has a runny nose. He wipes it with his hand. Then he reaches into the bowl to grab a piece of pork. You're no longer hungry. You reach for the cup. It is also communal. A large goblet is passed down the line. You watch the woman to your right take a drink. She has sores on her lip. Maybe herpes. Maybe something worse. She takes a long swig, backwashing slightly, and hands the cup to you. You drink. Because refusing the cup is an insult that could start a feud. Hygiene at the table is a suggestion, not a rule. You wipe your greasy fingers on the tablecloth. Or, if you are in a fancy house, you wipe them on a dog. Yes, dogs roam the hall, fighting for scraps under the table. Using a dog as a napkin is considered acceptable behaviour. And the noise. It's not polite conversation. It is a roar. People are drunk. The wine is watered down, but they drink gallons of it. There are minstrels playing loud, screeching music to drown out the sound of people chewing with their mouths open. There are jesters, who are often people with mental or physical disabilities exploited for laughs, jumping around, hitting people with bladders on sticks. And then the subtleties arrive. These are sculptures made of sugar and almond paste, marzipan. They are shaped like castles, ships, or biblical scenes. They are beautiful. They are also hard as rock. You admire them, maybe chip a piece off. This sugar is the reason Queen Elizabeth's teeth turned black. Sugar was the ultimate status symbol. If you had black teeth, it meant you were rich enough to rot them. Some people even blackened their teeth artificially just to look wealthy. The feast ends. You are bloated, drunk, and covered in grease. You stumble out of the hall. But the night isn't over. You have to get home. And in the medieval world, the commute is the most dangerous part of the day. Travel in the Middle Ages is not like travel today. Today, the road is a public utility. In 1350, the road is a no-man's land. You leave the safety of the city walls. The gates are locked at sundown, so if you're late, you are sleeping in the ditch. But you made it out. The road is dirt. If it rained recently, it is mud. Deep, sucking mud that can pull a shoe off a horse. If it's dry, it's a dust cloud that coats your lungs. There are no signs. You navigate by landmarks. Turn left at the hanging tree. Go straight past the rock that looks like a demon. If you get lost, you don't ask for directions. You panic, because the woods are watching. The forest alongside the road is the king's forest. This doesn't mean it's a park, it means the king owns the deer. If you kill a deer, you lose a hand. But the king doesn't police the woods for safety. He polices them for profit. The real danger comes from the highwaymen. These aren't the dashing romantic bandits of poetry. These are desperate men, often former soldiers who came home from a war to find their farm gone or their family dead. They have weapons, they have PTSD, and they have zero empathy. They don't just want your money, they want your clothes. Cloth is expensive. A good wool tunic is worth months of wages, so they will strip you naked and leave you in the snow. If you resist, they kill you. There is no forensic science. A body in the woods is just another meal for the wolves. But let's say you have a horse. You are rich. You are safe, right? Wrong. A horse is a liability. It needs food. It needs water. It can go lame, and it makes you a target. And bridges? Bridges are extortion points. A local lord might build a bridge and charge a toll, or a hermit might live on the bridge. Yes, bridge hermits were a thing, and demand alms. If the bridge is broken, you have to ford the river. Fording a river in armour or heavy clothes is the leading cause of accidental death for travellers. You slip, you sink, you drown in 3 feet of water because wool weighs 50 pounds when wet. You decide to stay at an inn, the medieval inn, a place of warmth and welcome. No, it is a barn with ale. You pay for a bed. This means a spot on a large mattress shared by 3 strangers. You don't know them. One of them is snoring, the other is scratching lice. You sleep with your money pouch tied around your groin because it's the only place a thief might hesitate to touch. Or not. Thieves were bold. The innkeeper is not your friend. He might be working with the bandits. He tells them when a rich merchant leaves in the morning. He waters down the ale. He serves mystery pie. This is why hospitality laws were so sacred in ancient cultures, because travel was so terrifying that turning away a stranger was basically sentencing them to death. But maybe you aren't travelling by road. Maybe you're travelling by sea. If you thought the Viking ship was bad, welcome to the medieval cog, a round, tubby merchant ship that bobbed like a cork. You're a pilgrim. You're going to Jerusalem or Santiago de Compostela to save your soul. You pay a captain. He packs you into the hold with 50 other pilgrims. There is no toilet, just a bucket. Everyone is seasick. The smell below decks is a mixture of vomit, bilge water, and unwashed wool. You cannot go on deck because of the waves. You sit in the dark praying while the ship groans. Shipwrecks are common. Pirates are everywhere. Barbary corsairs from North Africa hunt in the Mediterranean looking for slaves. If they catch you, you aren't killed. You're taken to the slave markets of Algiers or Tunis. You will spend the rest of your life rowing a galley. Travel is not leisure. Travel is a trauma. The word travel comes from the French word travail, which means work or suffering. It was literally torture. But let's pause the suffering for a moment. Let's look at the people who chose a different kind of suffering. The people who looked at the filth, the war, and the noise of the world and said, "No thanks, I'm going to sit in a room and never speak again." We're going to the monastery. Hollywood paints monks as chubby, happy guys who brew beer and copy books, or as mysterious ninjas in robes. The reality of monastic life was a psychological endurance test that would break a modern Navy SEAL. Imagine waking up at midnight, every night, for the rest of your life. This is matins, the night prayer. The bell rings. You get up from your straw mat in the freezing dormitory. You're not allowed to speak. You walk in silence to the icy stone church. You chant for an hour. Then you go back to bed. Then you wake up at dawn for lauds, then prime, then terce, then sext, then nun, then vespers, then compline. Your entire life is sliced into small blocks of time governed by a bell. You have no autonomy. You own nothing. The clothes on your back belong to the order. Even your body is not your own. You take a vow of silence. You develop a sign language to ask for things at dinner. Pass the salt becomes a complex hand gesture. You're surrounded by people, but you are utterly alone inside your head. And the diet. In some orders, like the Carthusians, you never eat meat. You fast constantly. You wear a hair shirt, a rough undergarment made of goat hair that scratches your skin raw, to remind you of Christ's suffering. But here is the twist. For many people, this was the best option available. Why? Job security. You get fed every day. You aren't going to get drafted into a war. You aren't going to die in childbirth. You have access to books. You are literate in a world of illiterates. The monastery was the only place where a peasant boy could become powerful. If you were smart, you could rise. You could become an abbot. You could advise kings. You could become pope. It was the corporate ladder of the Middle Ages, but the price of entry was your freedom. And sometimes the monastery wasn't a sanctuary, it was a pressure cooker. Put 50 men in a confined space, deprive them of sleep, food, and women, and watch what happens. Arguments, factions, madness. There is a condition called acedia, the noonday demon. It was a spiritual listlessness, a depression that struck monks in the heat of the day. They would stare out the window and hate their lives. They would hate the brother sitting next to them because he chewed too loudly. They would question God. It was medieval burnout, and there was no therapy, just more prayer. So, whether you're feasting in a hall, dodging bandits on the road, or chanting in a cold chapel, medieval life is a cage. It is a cage made of stone, mud, and social rules. But what if you didn't fit in the cage? What if you were different? What if you were the person the village whispered about? The one who knew which herbs cured a fever and which ones stopped a heart? We're going to talk about the witches, but not the ones with pointy hats. The real ones. The women and men who lived on the edge of the forest and the edge of the law. And we're going to find out why being wise was the most dangerous job description in history. Congratulations, you are now the most dangerous person in the village, not because you have a sword, but because you know which mushrooms will make a man hallucinate and which ones will stop his heart. You are the cunning woman, or the wise woman. The church calls you a problem. The neighbours call you a witch. But when their baby has a fever at 3 LM, they knock on your door, not the priest's. Let's dismantle the Halloween costume image. You don't have green skin, you don't wear a pointy hat, you look like everyone else, tired, wearing rough wool, hands stained with earth. You live on the edge of the village, maybe near the woods. This is practical. You need the plants. Your cottage smells amazing. While everyone else's house smells like smoke and sweat, yours smells of dried sage, rosemary, lavender and mugwort. Bunches of herbs hang from the rafters like a fragrant ceiling. You are the medieval pharmacist, but your prescriptions are a mix of botany and psychology. A neighbour comes to you with a toothache. You give him clove oil, which actually works. But you also tell him to walk around a church 3 times at midnight and spit. Does the walking help? No, but it makes him feel like he's doing something. It's the placebo effect, medieval edition. You brew Eye of Newt. Spoiler alert, it's not an actual newt's eye, it's mustard seed. Toe of frog, that's a buttercup. Witches used code names for plants to protect their trade secrets. It wasn't a satanic ritual, it was copyright protection. But this knowledge is a double-edged sword. If you give the village elder a potion for his heart, maybe foxglove, which contains digitalis, and he gets better, you are a hero. If you give him the potion and he dies, you murdered him with magic. The line between healer and witch is terrifyingly thin, and it depends entirely on luck. The real danger isn't the Spanish Inquisition, it's your neighbours. Most witch trials didn't start with a grand theological debate. They started with a petty argument over cheese. You asked to borrow a cup of milk. Your neighbour said no. You mumbled something under your breath as you walked away. 2 days later, her cow stopped giving milk. Conclusion? You cursed the cow. It sounds ridiculous to modern ears, but in a world without insurance, without vet science, and without a safety net, the death of a cow is a catastrophe. It means the family might starve. They need someone to blame. They can't blame God, that's blasphemy. They can't blame luck, that's unsatisfying. So they blame you. You're dragged before the local magistrate, the accusations fly. She gave me the evil eye. She was seen dancing in the moonlight. She has a suspicious mole on her back. Ah yes, the witch's mark. This is a mole, a skin tag, or a birthmark. The belief is that the devil needs a place to feed, or a place to mark his property. The witch pricker, a professional sadist paid by the town, will strip you naked in front of the crowd and poke every inch of your body with a long needle. If they find a spot that doesn't bleed or doesn't hurt, maybe a scar tissue or a callus, that's proof. You are a witch. And then comes the swimming. This is the logic that makes your brain hurt. They tie your thumbs to your toes. They throw you in the river. If you float, the water, which is pure and used for baptism, rejects you. You are a witch. They fish you out and hang you. If you sink, the water accepts you. You are innocent. You drown. But hey, at least your reputation is clear. It was a system, designed to kill eccentric women, independent widows, and anyone the town just didn't like. It was the ultimate weaponization of gossip. But there was one specific role that the wise woman played that was even more dangerous than mixing herbs: midwifery. If you think medieval war was dangerous, try medieval childbirth. It was the leading cause of death for women. Every pregnancy was a roll of the dice with your life. The birthing room is a female fortress. Men are banned. The windows are sealed tight to keep out drafts and demons. The fire is roared up to make it hot. It is dark, airless, and crowded with female relatives. You, the midwife, are in charge. You don't have sterile gloves. You have your hands, maybe rubbed with oil or fat. You have herbs to help with pain, hemlock or opium if you can get it. But the church frowns on pain relief. They believe the pain of childbirth is Eve's punishment for eating the apple. If you take away the pain, you are cheating God. So you work in secret. You use girdles, belts inscribed with prayers, wrapped around the mother's belly. You open all the doors and drawers in the house to symbolically open the path for the baby. If things go wrong, it is a horror show. If the baby is stuck, there are no C-sections, the mother wouldn't survive. You have hooks, you have knives. It is brutal, bloody work. And if the baby is born with a deformity, or a birthmark, or simply stillborn, the finger points at you. The midwife is a witch. She sacrificed the baby to the devil. Midwives were required by the church to be licensed, not for medical reasons, but to ensure they baptized the baby if it was dying. If a baby died unbaptized, it couldn't go to heaven. It went to limbo, eternal nothingness. The spiritual weight on your shoulders is crushing. But let's step away from the edge of life and death for a moment. Let's go somewhere where the only thing being butchered is dinner. We're going to the castle kitchen. If the great hall is the theatre, the kitchen is the engine room. And like any engine room, it is hot, loud, and dangerous. You walk in, the heat hits you like a physical blow. There are 3 massive fireplaces, each large enough to roast a whole ox. The fire never goes out. It burns 24 hours a day, consuming entire forests of wood. The noise is deafening, choppers chopping, pots clanging, cooks shouting orders. It is a military operation. You see the scullions. These are the lowest of the low, usually young boys, often naked or wearing rags because it's too hot for clothes. Their job is to scrub the pots, carry the garbage, and do the tasks nobody else wants. They sleep on the kitchen floor in the ashes for warmth. They are covered in soot and grease. But the most pathetic job in the kitchen belongs to the turn spit. The meat, the boars, the deer, the chickens, has to be turned constantly over the fire so it cooks evenly. If you stop, the meat burns and the head cook beats you with a ladle. Sometimes the turnspit is a boy. He sits by the fire, shielding his face from the blistering heat, turning the handle for hours. His skin is red and blistered. He is dehydrated. But sometimes the turnspit is a dog. Yes, the Canis vertigus, the turnspit dog. A specific breed of dog, long-bodied and short-legged, like a depressed corgi, bred specifically to run in a hamster wheel attached to the spit. The dog runs, the wheel turns, the meat roasts. It is a cruel invention. To keep the dog running, the cooks might throw hot coals into the wheel. These dogs were treated like machinery. When Sunday came, they were often used as foot warmers for the family in church because they were small and hot. It is a weird, sad footnote of culinary history. The kitchen is also a place of alchemy. The cooks are trying to preserve food without fridges. They encase meat in coffins, thick pastry crusts that aren't meant to be eaten, just to seal the meat from the air. This is the ancestor of the meat pie. They make pocket soup, broth boiled down until it's a hard, rubbery glue, which can be carried in a pocket and reconstituted with hot water. Medieval bouillon cubes. And they are masters of disguise. Remember, the Lord wants to be entertained. So the cook takes a fish, skins it, stuffs it with meat, sews it back up, paints it gold, and serves it breathing fire by putting camphor in its mouth. It's not dinner, it's a special effect show. But the kitchen has a dark side. The waste, the blood, the guts, the dirty water. It all flows out into a drain, or just into the moat. The castle moat isn't a shimmering blue defensive ring. It is a stagnant, open sewer filled with kitchen refuse and toilet waste. If you fall into the moat, you don't drown. You suffocate in sludge. Now let's leave the castle and go back to the city. But not to the streets. We're going to a place of business. A place where you might end up if you're unlucky or desperate, or just very, very flexible. We're going to the medieval university. Wait, you think, university? That sounds prestigious. Books, learning, togas. Think again. Medieval university students were the original frat boys from hell. You're a student at Oxford, or Paris, or Bologna. You're 14 or 15. You have travelled hundreds of miles to be here. You have no parents watching you. You have a little bit of money, and you are legally untouchable. This is the concept of benefit of clergy. Students were considered part of the church. This meant they couldn't be tried by local town courts. They could only be tried by church courts, which were notoriously lenient. So, if you get drunk, smash up a tavern, beat up a local, or steal a pig, the town guard can't touch you. You flash your tonsure, the shaved spot on your head, shout something in Latin, and you walk free. This caused town and gown riots, battles between the students, gown, and the locals, town. These weren't fistfights, they were wars. In the St. Scholastica Day riot in Oxford, 1355, an argument over bad wine turned into a 3-day battle. 63 scholars and 30 locals died. They used bows and arrows. They stormed the dormitories. It was a massacre over a bar tab. You live in a boarding house with 20 other students. It is cold. You sleep 2 to a bed. You wake up at 4 a.m. for lectures. The lecture hall has no heat. There are no textbooks because books are hand-copied and cost a fortune. The professor reads from the only book in the room. You have to memorise it. You sit on straw on the floor. If you fall asleep, you might get beaten. And what are you learning? Logic, grammar, rhetoric. You spend years arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Okay, that's a stereotype, but they did argue about incredibly abstract theological points, while the real world fell apart outside. You are hungry, always. Students were notoriously poor. You beg for money. You write letters home that sound exactly like modern emails from college kids. Dear father, send money. Also socks, but mostly money. I am studying very hard and definitely not drinking. But there is a darker side to the university. Body snatching. Medical students needed to learn anatomy. But dissecting human bodies was complicated. The church allowed it occasionally, usually on executed criminals, but there weren't enough criminals to go around. So students and professors turned to resurrectionism, digging up fresh graves. Imagine you are a student. It is midnight. You're in a graveyard with a shovel and your professor. You dig up a man who died yesterday. You haul him back to the lecture hall. You dissect him quickly before he smells too bad. It is science. But it is also a crime. It is a desperate grasp for knowledge in a world that considers curiosity a sin. And speaking of crimes, let's talk about what happens when you aren't a student. Let's talk about the people who enforce the law. The sheriff. Forget the Sheriff of Nottingham. The real medieval sheriff, Shire Reeve, was a bureaucrat with a quota. He had to collect taxes for the king. If he didn't collect enough, he had to pay the difference out of his own pocket. This made him aggressive. He wasn't catching Robin Hood. He was seizing your cow because you couldn't pay the land tax, or the hearth tax, or the brewing tax. And if you ran, he would raise the hue and cry. This is a legal requirement. If a crime is committed, the sheriff or the victim shouts. Everyone who hears the shout must drop what they are doing and chase the criminal. If you don't join the chase, you get fined. Imagine trying to rob a house, and suddenly the entire neighbourhood is sprinting after you with pitchforks and rolling pins because they don't want to pay a fine. It was the original community policing. But let's say you escape the sheriff. You escape the town. You want to go somewhere where no one can find you, somewhere off the map. You become a pilgrim, but not a tourist. Being a pilgrim was the medieval witness protection program. If you committed a crime, you could be sentenced to go on a pilgrimage. Walk to Rome and back barefoot, begging for food. It was a punishment. It got you out of town for a year. It was exhausting, dangerous, and humiliating. But for some, it was freedom. Women, who were usually confined to the house, could go on pilgrimage. It was the only time they were allowed to travel without a husband. They could see the world. They could meet people. They could buy souvenir badges made of lead to pin on their hats. The road to Santiago de Compostela was the medieval I-95. It was packed with people. There were guidebooks. There were souvenir shops. There were scammers selling the finger bone of St. Peter, which was usually a chicken bone. It was a travelling circus of faith and fraud. But as you walk the road, dodging bandits and buying fake relics, you notice something. The landscape is changing. The forests are getting smaller. The towns are getting bigger. The silence of the ancient world is being filled with the noise of industry. Because while the knights were fighting and the monks were praying, someone else was inventing the future. The engineers. They weren't building castles. They were building mills, water mills, windmills. This sounds boring. It isn't. It is the medieval industrial revolution. Before the mill, if you wanted flour, you had to grind grain by hand with a rock. It took hours. It broke your back. Then someone figured out how to use the river. A watermill has gears. It has cams. It translates the flow of water into mechanical power. And once you have power, you can do anything. They used mills to grind grain, to saw wood, to crush ore, to full cloth, pounding wool to make it thick. The mill was a machine that did the work of 100 men. It was loud. It was dangerous. If you got your clothes caught in the gears, you were dead. But it freed up labour. Suddenly you didn't need everyone grinding grain. You could have people doing other things, like building cathedrals, or inventing spectacles, or making paper. You are standing in the mill watching the giant stone wheel turn, feeling the floor shake, and you realise this is the end of the Middle Ages. This machine is going to change everything. But progress has a price. The mill belongs to the Lord. You are forced to use it. You have to pay a multure, the tax of grain, to use the machine. If you're caught grinding your own grain at home with a hand quern, the Lord will confiscate your quern and break it. They monopolise technology. So you stand there, holding your sack of grain, listening to the roar of the water and the grind of the stone, you're witnessing the birth of industry, the birth of the machine age, and you realise that for all the swords and sorcery, the thing that really shaped history wasn't magic, it was the gear. So we have talked about the filth, the fear, the food, and the gears. But there is one sound we haven't discussed, a sound so common in the medieval world that it was basically background noise, like traffic is today. The sound of crying. But not just any crying. We're talking about the relentless, piercing wail of a medieval baby. And frankly, the baby has a right to scream. Because being born in the Middle Ages is the most dangerous thing a human being can do. Let's look at childhood. Or, as historians call it, the obstacle course of death. You are born. Congratulations. You survived the midwife's unwashed hands. Now, you're swaddled. This means you're wrapped in linen bands so tight you cannot move your arms or legs. Medieval people believed that if you didn't do this, the baby's limbs would grow crooked. Or worse, the baby might crawl on all fours like an animal. So, you are basically a tiny mummy for the first few months of your life. You're hung on a hook on the wall, or placed in a cradle by the fire. If you're lucky, a cat doesn't sit on your face. If you're unlucky, a pig wanders in and, well, let's just say there were laws about keeping pigs away from cradles for a reason. If you survive infancy, and 50% didn't, you enter the toddler phase. This is where the real fun begins. There is no baby-proofing. The hearth is an open fire. The tools are sharp. The well is a hole in the ground. Medieval coroners' rolls are tragic lists of toddlers falling into pots of boiling milk, getting kicked by horses, or wandering into the woods. But let's assume you are nimble. You dodge the fire. You survive the smallpox. You reach the age of 7. This is the age of reason. In the eyes of the church and the law, you are now a mini-adult. You can commit sins. You can be employed. You can be married, betrothed at least. Playtime is over. If you are a peasant boy, you are herding geese or picking stones out of the field. If you're a girl, you are spinning wool or watching the younger kids. There are toys, knucklebones, dolls made of rags, hoops to roll, but play is snatched in the moments between chores. But what if you are a noble child? Surely that's better. Well, you have better clothes, but you also have the whipping boy. Yes, this was real. If you are a prince, your tutor cannot hit you, you're divine, but you still need to be punished when you fail your Latin. So the tutor brings in a poor boy, your whipping boy. When you mess up, he gets beaten. The psychological logic is that you will feel guilty and learn, or more likely, you will just learn that you can outsource your suffering to poor people. It's a great lesson for a future tyrant. But childhood wasn't all grim. There was a culture of misrule. Once a year, usually around Christmas, there was the boy bishop. A choir boy was elected to be bishop for a day. He wore the robes. He led the service. He gave orders to the real bishop. It was a carnival of inversion, a safety valve for a society that was usually rigid. For one day, the kids ruled. Then, the sun came up, and it was back to the fields. Now, let's fast forward. You are an adult. You survived childhood. You survived the plague. You want to have a little fun. What do you do for entertainment? You go to the bear pit. Bear baiting, it sounds horrific to us. It was hilarious to them. A bear is chained to a post. A pack of dogs is released. They fight. People bet on the dogs or the bear. Queen Elizabeth, I loved it. She would take foreign ambassadors to see it. Look at the majesty of our bear getting bitten by a mastiff. Or maybe you prefer cockfighting, or throwing at cocks, where you tie a rooster to a stake and throw sticks at it until it dies. Why was it so violent? Because life was violent. When you butcher your own meat and watch executions for fun, a dogfight isn't shocking. It's just Tuesday. But there was also the mystery play. This was the medieval blockbuster movie. The local guilds would put on plays based on the Bible, but they had special effects. The Hellmouth, a giant mechanical dragon head built on a wagon. Smoke poured out of its mouth. Devils, actors in costumes, would run out, grab people from the audience and drag them into hell. It was interactive theatre. It was terrifying and thrilling. They used fireworks. They used pulleys to make angels fly. Sometimes the rope snapped and the angel fell. Sometimes the Hellmouth caught fire and burned down the stage. It was live entertainment in the truest sense. Anything could happen. But amidst the noise and the violence, there was a quieter revolution happening. One that would change the world more than any war. The invention of the book. Wait, books existed before, right? Scrolls, manuscripts, yes. But they were made of parchment, animal skin. To make one Bible, you had to kill 300 sheep. Then you had to scrape the skin, stretch it, and write on it by hand. A book cost as much as a house. Then came paper. And then the printing press. You are standing in a print shop in 1455. The smell is different here. It's not dung or smoke. It's oil and ink. A man is setting type, tiny metal letters. He arranges them in a frame. He inks them. He presses a sheet of paper down. Clunk. He pulls the paper out. It is perfect. He does it again. Clunk. In one day he can print more pages than a monk could write in a year. This is the information explosion. Suddenly, knowledge isn't locked in a monastery. It's cheap. It's portable. You can put a pamphlet in your pocket. Why does this matter? Because of the Reformation. Because now you don't need a priest to tell you what the Bible says. You can read it yourself. And when you read it, you might realize the priest was lying. Or that the king isn't as holy as he claims. The printing press didn't just print books. It printed revolutions. But let's go back to the streets one last time. Because there is one group of people we haven't talked about. The ones who didn't fit into the feudal system. The ones who weren't peasants, or nobles, or monks. The outcasts, the lepers. You hear a bell ringing, a slow, mournful clang. The crowd parts. People cover their faces. A figure walks down the centre of the street. He's wearing a long grey cloak with a hood covering his face. He carries a wooden clapper or a bell. He has to sound it to warn you he is coming. He is unclean. Leprosy, Hansen's disease, was the ultimate stigma. If you were diagnosed, the church held a living funeral for you. They read the burial service. They declared you dead to the world. You lost your property. You lost your family. You were banished to a lazar house, leper colony, outside the walls. But here is the twist. Medieval people were terrified of lepers, but they also revered them. They believed lepers were suffering purgatory on earth, which meant they would go straight to heaven when they died. So giving money to a leper was a spiritual investment. Here is a coin. Please put in a good word for me with God. So the leper is a paradox. Shunned yet holy. Dead yet alive. They walked the roads, ghosts in their own lifetime, ringing their bells, a constant reminder that the body is fragile and that social status can be erased by a single bacteria. And finally, let's talk about the end. Not the plague, not the execution, but the good death. In the modern world, we want to die in our sleep, quickly, without pain. In the Middle Ages, sudden death was a nightmare. From sudden and unprepared death, good Lord deliver us. Why? Because you need time to confess. You need time to pay your debts. You need time to say goodbye. You want to die in your bed, surrounded by your family, holding a candle. You want to make a good end. There were books called Ars Moriendi, The Art of Dying. They were self-help books for death. They told you how to resist the devil's final temptations, despair, impatience, pride, as you lay dying. Imagine a world where death is so common, so present, that you have to practice for it. You lie in your bed. The priest is there. Your family is there. The room is crowded. It isn't private. Death is a public event. You take your last breath. The candle is blown out. The window is open to let your soul fly out. And then the bell rings. The passing bell. It rings a specific number of times. 3 times for a man, 2 for a woman, then 1 ring for every year of your life. The whole village stops. The blacksmith puts down his hammer. The ploughman stops his oxen. They count the rings. 42 rings, that must be John the Miller. They say a quick prayer, and then they go back to work. Because the harvest won't wait. The winter is coming, and the living have to keep living. This is the reality of the past. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a movie. It was a grind. It was a struggle against cold, hunger, and disease. But it was also a triumph. Because despite the fleas, the mud, the bad kings, and the worst doctors, they survived. They built cathedrals that still stand. They wrote music that still makes us cry. They invented the university, the book, the clock, the bank. They were tougher than us. They had to be. So, the next time you feel overwhelmed by modern life, by traffic or emails or social media, just remember you aren't eating a rat, you aren't sleeping on a bag of straw, and you don't have to worry about the Vikings, you're doing just fine. But wait, we aren't done yet. because while the medieval peasant was trying not to freeze, someone else was trying to figure out how to conquer the world. We are going to pivot. We are leaving the mud of Europe and heading south, to the sands, to the gold, to the Empire of the Sun. We are going to talk about Mansa Musa, the richest man who ever lived, and the pilgrimage that broke the economy of the ancient world. Leave the mud behind. Leave the freezing rain, the thatched roofs, and the smell of boiled cabbage. We're going somewhere where the sun is not a distant memory, but a hammer. You're standing on the edge of the Sahara Desert in the year 1324. The air is so dry it sucks the moisture right out of your skin. The silence is absolute until the ground begins to vibrate. You look to the horizon. A cloud of dust is rising, stretching for miles. Is it a storm? Is it an army? No, it is a bank account. This is the Hajj of Mansa Musa, the Emperor of Mali, and you're about to witness the greatest flex in human history. While Europe is shivering in the Dark Ages, scratching lice and dying of dysentery, West Africa is paving the streets with gold. Literally, Mansa Musa is the richest human being to ever walk the earth. Not Jeff Bezos rich, not Elon Musk rich. We are talking about wealth so vast it cannot be calculated by modern economists. He owns the Bambuck goldfields, which produce half of the old world's supply, and he has decided to go on a road trip. He brings 60,000 people with him. Imagine the entire population of a medieval city deciding to walk across the desert. Soldiers, heralds, servants, scholars, and 12,000 slaves, and every single one of them is wearing Persian silk and carrying gold. You watch them pass. It takes days. There are 80 camels carrying 300 pounds of gold dust each. The soldiers carry staffs made of solid gold. The king himself sits under a canopy, indifferent to the heat, handing out gold nuggets to beggars like they are candy. But this isn't just a parade. It is a logistical miracle and a nightmare. Think about the water. You're in the desert. You have 60,000 humans and thousands of animals. A camel can drink 30 gallons in 10 minutes. A horse needs 10. A human needs a gallon just to stay alive. You aren't just moving an army. You're moving an ocean. They have to dig wells at every stop. They have to carry water skins that sweat and leak. If the caravan moves too slow, people die of thirst. If it moves too fast, the animals collapse. The trail behind them is littered with the bones of camels that couldn't keep up. It is a river of gold flowing over a bed of death. But the real chaos happens when they reach Cairo. You are a merchant in the Cairo market. You sell gold. It is a stable currency. It holds its value. You feel safe. Then Mansa Musa arrives. He is feeling generous. He gives gold to the Sultan. He gives gold to the poor. He buys souvenirs at prices that are laughable. You want 10 dinars for that rug? Here, take 100. He floods the market. Suddenly gold is everywhere. It is as common as sand. And because it is common, it is worthless. The value of gold in Egypt crashes. Prices skyrocket. Inflation destroys the economy. A loaf of bread that cost 1 copper coin yesterday now costs a silver one. Mansa Musa broke the economy of the Middle East by accident. He was so rich that his kindness caused a recession that lasted for 12 years. Europeans hear about this. They see maps, like the Catalan Atlas, where a black king is depicted holding a gold nugget the size of a grapefruit. And their eyes go wide. They stop thinking about Jerusalem and start thinking about Africa. The greed that will eventually drive colonization begins here, with a rumour of endless gold. But let's leave the gold behind, because wealth doesn't make you safe. In the medieval world, walls make you safe. Or do they? We're going to pivot. We are leaving the cities, the castles and the gold mines. We're going to the open plain, to the steppe, where the only thing that matters is how fast you can ride and how far you can shoot. We're going to meet the Mongols, and we are going to find out why the sound of hoofbeats was the most terrifying sound in the history of the world. If you think the Vikings were scary, the Mongols were a force of nature. They were the apocalypse on horseback. You're a guard on the wall of a Chinese city, or a Persian city, or a Russian city. It doesn't matter. The result is the same. You see dust on the horizon, then you see the banners, the yak-tail standards blowing in the wind. The Mongols don't fight like Europeans. They don't line up in a field and charge. They flow like water. They ride ponies, small, ugly, mean little horses that can eat grass and survive in freezing temperatures. Each warrior has 4 or 5 horses, He switches them out as he rides, so he never has to stop. The Mongol army can travel 100 miles a day. Medieval knights travel 20. Before you even know they are coming, they are behind you, and they are hungry, not just for conquest, but for food. Let's talk about the Mongol diet. It is efficient. They don't carry supply wagons. Wagons are slow. They carry borths, dried meat ground into a powder. They put a scoop in a leather bag with water, hang it on the saddle, and the motion of the horse shakes it into a soup while they ride. Instant protein shake. If they run out of water, they nick the horse's neck vein and drink the blood. Then, they seal it up and keep riding. The horse is the transport, the companion, and the refrigerator. You are on the wall. You think you're safe. You have stone walls 50 feet high. But the Mongols are engineers. They captured Chinese engineers. They build trebuchets. They build giant crossbows. And they use terror. If you surrender immediately, you might live. You will pay taxes, you will give them your engineers, but you will live. If you resist, they kill everyone. Not metaphorically, literally. At the city of Nishapur, the Mongols killed, allegedly, 1.7 million people. They piled the skulls into pyramids. One pyramid for men, one for women, one for children. It was psychological warfare. They wanted the next city to hear about the pyramids. They wanted you to be so terrified that you opened the gates before they even arrived. But here is the twist. The Mongols were also the most tolerant rulers in history. Once they conquered you, they didn't care who you worshipped. You could be Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Taoist. They didn't care. Pray to your god for the Khan's health, they said. Just pay your taxes. They created the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. You could walk from the Pacific Ocean to the Black Sea with a gold plate on your head and not get robbed, because everyone knew that if you touched a traveller on the Silk Road, the Mongols would hunt you down and peel your skin off. It was safety through absolute brutality. But let's zoom in on the warrior himself. You are a Mongol warrior. You're wearing a silk shirt under your armour. Why silk? Because it is tough. If an arrow hits you, it doesn't break the silk. It pushes the fabric into the wound. When you need to get the arrow out, you don't have to cut it. You just pull the silk, and the arrowhead pops out. It is ballistic technology. You sleep in the saddle. You can shoot a bird out of the sky while riding at full gallop. You don't have a home. Your home is the yurt, a felt tent that can be taken down in 15 minutes. You smell like mutton fat and horses. You wash your hands in urine because water is sacred and shouldn't be dirtied. Yes, really. And you are part of a machine that conquered more land in 25 years than the Romans did in 400. But even the Mongols had a weakness. They couldn't conquer the ocean. When Kublai Khan tried to invade Japan, he built a massive fleet. The divine wind, the kamikaze, a typhoon, smashed the fleet. The Mongols drowned in their armour. It was the only time nature beat them. So, we have seen the gold of Mali and the iron of the Mongols. We have seen the mud of London. But there is one place we haven't looked. A place that was hidden for centuries. A place that was building skyscrapers in the jungle while Europe was building huts. We're going to the Americas, to the Maya, and the Aztecs. And we aren't talking about human sacrifice. Well, maybe a little. We're talking about their daily life, which was surprisingly cleaner, healthier, and more advanced than anything in Europe. While Londoners were throwing poop in the street, the Aztecs had public toilets. They had street cleaners. They washed every day. So, let's cross the ocean. Let's enter the city of Tenochtitlan. You're standing on a causeway, a road built on top of a lake. The city floats. It is an island of white stone in the middle of a sparkling blue lake. It is bigger than London, bigger than Paris. You walk into the market. It is organised. There are judges who check the quality of the goods. If you sell bad corn, they beat you. The smell? It smells of flowers, of burning copal incense, of chocolate. Yes, chocolate, but not the sweet stuff. This is zocolatl, bitter water. It is a spicy, frothy drink made from cacao beans, chili peppers, and vanilla. It is an energy drink for warriors. You are a warrior here, but you don't fight to kill. You fight to capture. In Aztec warfare, killing is a waste. You want to tackle your enemy, tie him up, and bring him home. Why? Because the sun needs to recede. This is the dark heart of the Aztec world. They believed that the sun died every night. To give it the strength to rise in the morning, it needed precious water, blood. So the sacrifice wasn't cruelty. In their minds, it was public service. I am saving the universe by cutting out this heart. Imagine the pressure. You wake up every morning, look at the sunrise and think, phew, we paid the rent. But life wasn't all blood. It was poetry. The Aztecs loved flowers. They held poetry contests. We only live on Earth for a short while, they wrote. Like a jade stone, we shatter. They knew life was fragile, and they were right, because on the horizon ships are appearing, ships with white sails, carrying men with metal skin and sticks that spit fire. The collision of worlds is coming. But before we get to the conquest, let's look at something specific, something weird. Let's talk about teeth. We talked about medieval teeth rotting, but the Maya, they had grills, literally. They drilled holes in their teeth and inserted jade, turquoise and gold gems. They didn't have electric drills. They used bow drills and obsidian dust. It was incredibly painful, but it was beautiful. They filed their teeth into points to look like sharks or jaguars, and they reshaped their heads. When a baby was born, they bound its head between two boards to make the skull long and sloping. To them this was the ultimate beauty. It looked like an ear of corn, and corn was God. So imagine a Maya noble, towering headdress, jade teeth glistening, skull elongated, covered in tattoos. To a European he looked like a monster. To his people he looked like perfection. It reminds us that normal is just a story we tell ourselves. We have travelled from the smoke of London to the gold of Mali, to the steppes of Mongolia, to the floating gardens of Mexico. We have seen how people slept, how they ate, how they fought, and how they died. But there is one more layer to peel back, the layer of the unseen, the microscopic. Because while humans were building empires, something else was evolving, something that didn't care about borders or kings. We are going to talk about the parasites, the worms, the lice, the things that lived inside us. Because you can't understand history until you understand that for most of human existence, we were never alone. We were walking ecosystems, and the things living in our guts shaped history just as much as the things living in our castles. Ready to get a little gross? Good. If you could take a microscope back to the Middle Ages, or Rome, or ancient Egypt, you wouldn't see a human being. You would see a crowded bus. Every person you met in history was a host, not in the polite dinner party sense, but in the biological sense. They were walking zoos. Let's start with the outside, the head lice. In the modern world, lice are a panic-inducing letter sent home from school. In the past, they were just hair texture. Everyone had them. Kings had them. Popes had them. If you see a painting of a medieval saint looking up to heaven with a pained expression, he isn't having a vision. He's probably just itchy. The solution? Shaving. That is why so many ancient cultures, like the Egyptians, shaved their entire bodies and wore wigs. It wasn't just fashion, it was pest control. If you have no hair, the lice have nowhere to live. You can take your wig off, boil it, and put it back on. But the real party was on the inside. Archaeologists have dug up ancient latrines. They analyse the fossilised poop, coprolites, and what they find is horrifying. Almost everyone had worms, roundworms, whipworms, tapeworms. Imagine a tapeworm. It lives in your intestine. It can grow to be 20 feet long. It eats your food before you do. You're always hungry, but you're always losing weight. In a time of famine, having a tapeworm was like having a thief living in your stomach. And how did you get them? From the meat. Remember those feasts? The half-cooked pork, the beef that was smoked but not really cooked. That is how the worm gets in. Or, if you were really unlucky, you got the guinea worm. This is a parasite you get from drinking bad water. It grows inside your leg. It can be 3 feet long. When it is ready to lay eggs, it burns. It creates a blister on your skin that feels like fire. You want to put your leg in cool water to stop the pain, but that is exactly what the worm wants. When you put your leg in the water, the blister bursts, the worm comes out, and it releases millions of larvae into the water to infect the next person. The treatment? You have to pull it out. But you can't just yank it, or it will break and rot inside you. You have to wrap the end of the worm around a small stick. Every day you wind the stick a few turns, pulling the worm out inch by inch. It takes weeks. Some historians believe this is the origin of the rod of Asclepius, the symbol of medicine. A snake, or worm, wrapped around a stick. But parasites weren't just annoying, they change behaviour. There is a parasite called Toxoplasma gondii. It lives in cats, but it can infect humans. In mice, it makes them unafraid of cats. It rewires their brain so they get eaten, which completes the parasite's life cycle. In humans, some scientists think it makes us more reckless, more aggressive, slower reaction times. Did toxoplasma influence history? Did a general make a risky charge because a parasite in his brain told him to? Did a king start a war because he was infected by his favourite hunting cat? We will never know. But it is a disturbing thought. But let's leave the microscopic world and look at something bigger, something louder. We're going to talk about the sound of history. Movies make the past sound like an orchestra, violins swelling as the hero rides over the hill. In reality, the past was noisy, but the noises were different. There was no hum of electricity, no distant roar of the highway, no airplanes. Instead, there were bells. In a medieval city, the bells never stopped. They rang for prayer. They rang for the market opening. They rang for curfew. They rang for fire. They rang for death. The bells were the internet. They told you the news. A fast panicked ringing, invasion or fire, a slow tolling ring. The king is dead. And then there were the town criers, men with lungs of leather who stood in the square and shouted the news. Oyez, oyez, Maria ye. They were the Twitter feed. If you wanted to know if a law had changed, you had to listen to the man screaming next to the fish stall, but the loudest sound. The blacksmith. Every village had one. The clang, clang, clang of metal on metal was the heartbeat of the pre-industrial world. It started at dawn and ended at dusk. It was the sound of civilization being made. And silence. Silence was terrifying. If the bell stopped, if the smith stopped, it meant something was wrong. It meant the plague had come, or the enemy was at the gate. Silence was the sound of death. But let's pivot again. We have talked about the noise, the smell, the worms. Let's talk about the one thing everyone in history wanted but almost no one had. Light. We take light for granted. We flip a switch. The sun comes on. In the past, light was a luxury. It was expensive. If you were a peasant, your light was the fire. When the fire died, your day was over. If you needed to move around, you used a rushlight. This is a dried reed dipped in animal fat. It burns for about 20 minutes. It sputters. It smells like burning bacon grease. It gives off about as much light as a very weak glow stick. Candles. Beeswax candles were for the church and the rich. They smelled like honey and burned clean. Tallow candles, animal fat, were for everyone else. They dripped, they smoked, they smelled. And oil lamps? Only in the south, where olive oil was cheap. In the north, oil was too precious to burn. This lack of light changed how people thought. The night was long. In winter, you spent 14 hours in the dark. What do? You tell stories. This is why oral tradition was so strong. You memorized your family history. You memorized the Bible. You memorized epic poems like Beowulf. Because you couldn't read in the dark. The darkness also made the stars more important. Without light pollution, the Milky Way was a blinding white stripe across the sky. Everyone knew the constellations. They were the clock, the calendar, and the map. When a comet appeared, it was terrifying. A hairy star. It meant a king was going to die. It meant God was angry. Because the sky was perfect, and a comet was a scratch on the face of perfection. But let's move from the sky to the ground, to the road. We talked about travel being dangerous, but we didn't talk about why people travelled. We assumed people stayed in their villages. Most did, but some were restless. The vagabonds, the wanderers. There was an entire subculture of people who lived on the road. Jugglers, minstrels, pardoner, men who sold fake forgiveness from the Pope. They had their own language. Canting, a secret slang so they could talk about their scams without the locals understanding. They had their own signs. A mark scratched on a gatepost meant good food here. A different mark meant dangerous dog. The hobo code isn't new. It's ancient. They were the news carriers. If you wanted to know what was happening in the next kingdom, you asked the juggler. He might lie, but he would make it entertaining. And then there were the spies. Every king had spies, but they weren't James Bond. They were merchants. They were monks. A monk could travel anywhere. No one stopped a monk. So if you wanted to send a secret message to a rebel lord, you didn't send a soldier. You sent a brother in a rough robe with a message sewn into the hem of his garment. But the best spies, the women, washerwomen, servants. Who listens when the king is arguing with his mistress? The woman scrubbing the floor. Who knows who is visiting the queen at night? The lady in waiting. History books focus on the battles. They forget the whispers in the laundry room. But that is where the real information lived. Now let's look at something else that is often overlooked. The smell of sanctity. We talked about bad smells. But what about good smells? In the medieval mind, smell was spiritual. Heaven smelled like roses. Hell smelled like sulphur, rotten eggs. So if a person died and their body didn't smell, they were a saint. This is the odour of sanctity. When they dug up a saint's body years later, if it smelled sweet, or just didn't smell like rot, it was proof of holiness. Monks would actually boil bones in wine and spices before putting them in reliquaries to make sure they smelled good. It was holy perfume. Incense in church wasn't just for atmosphere. It was to cover the smell of the unwashed congregation, but it was also to create a cloud of unknowing, a barrier between the earth and the divine. You walk into a cathedral, it smells of frankincense and myrrh. The light comes through stained glass, turning the dust motes red and blue. The chant echoes. For a peasant who lives in a mud hut, this is the closest thing to alien contact they will ever experience. It is a sensory overload designed to make you fall to your knees. Architecture was a weapon of awe, but let's leave the cathedral and go to the most dangerous place of all. The bedroom, not for sleep, for birth. We talked about the midwife, but we didn't talk about the heirs. In a monarchy, the Queen's womb is a matter of national security. If she has a son, there is peace. If she has a daughter, there is anxiety. If she has no children, there is war. The pressure is unimaginable. You are a queen. You have to give birth in front of witnesses. Why? To prove you didn't swap the baby. When a royal baby is born, the room is packed with bishops, nobles, and officials. They are staring at you while you scream. If the baby is a boy, bonfires are lit on the hills. Wine flows in the fountains, literally. If it is a girl, silence. Better luck next time. And if the baby dies, or if you cannot conceive, they blame you. They say you are cursed. They say you are sinful. Henry VIII divorced and beheaded wives because they couldn't give him a son. He didn't know about X and Y chromosomes. He didn't know it was his sperm that determined the gender. He blamed them. History blamed them. The bedroom was a political battlefield where biology determined the fate of nations. But let's zoom out. We have looked at the details, the smells, the sounds, the fears. What about the big picture? Why did the medieval world end? It wasn't one thing. It wasn't just the printing press. It wasn't just gunpowder. It was the coffee house. Yes, coffee. In the Middle Ages, everyone drank beer. Beer makes you sluggish. It makes you dull. Then, in the 1600s, coffee arrived from the Ottoman Empire. Suddenly people were drinking a stimulant. They gathered in coffee houses. They sat down, sober, wired on caffeine, and they talked. They talked about science. They talked about politics. They talked about revolution. The Enlightenment, the age of reason, of democracy, of science, floated on a tide of coffee. It woke the world up, literally. The medieval fog of alcohol lifted, and the sharp, jittery clarity of the modern world began. So, the next time you drink your morning coffee, remember, you're drinking the fuel of the revolution. But before we wrap up this journey through the muck and the majesty, we have one more stop. We have seen the past. But what did the past think of us? Did they imagine the future? Yes. Roger Bacon, a friar in the 13th century, wrote a letter. He predicted cars. Carriages without horses that move with inestimable speed. He predicted airplanes. Instruments to fly withal so that a man sitting in the middle of the instrument may beat the air with artificial wings. He predicted submarines. Instruments for walking in the sea. He was looked at as a wizard. He was imprisoned, but he saw it. He looked out of his cold stone tower, past the plague, past the mud, and he saw us. He saw you. He saw a world where we could fly, where we could travel under the sea, where we could speak across the world. He didn't know about the internet. He didn't know about antibiotics, but he knew that humanity wasn't done. So, as you lie in your bed, safe, warm, fed, think of Roger Bacon. Think of the peasant breathing through his nose to survive the night. Think of the Viking in his leather bag. They endured so you could dream. The past is a horror show. It is a nightmare of filth and pain. But it is also a story of stubborn, unreasonable hope. And that is the only reason we are here. So, We have survived the mud, the plague, and the worms. We have seen the gritty reality of survival. But what about vanity? Surely if you were rich, if you were noble, you could escape the horror? Wrong. In the past, beauty didn't just hurt, it killed you. Let's step into the dressing room of a Renaissance noblewoman, or perhaps even Queen Elizabeth herself. You see a face that is perfectly startlingly white. Not pale, white, like porcelain, like a statue. It is the ideal of beauty. It shows you don't work in the sun. It hides the scars from the smallpox that almost everyone survived as a child. But how do you get that look? You use Venetian ceruse. This is a thick paste made of vinegar and lead. You slather it on your face, your neck, your chest. It dries into a smooth, hard mask. It covers every blemish. But lead is a heavy metal neurotoxin. Every day you wear it, your skin absorbs the poison. At first, your skin dries out. It turns grey. It shrivels. What do? You apply a thicker layer of lead to hide the damage caused by the lead. It is a vicious cycle. Eventually your hair falls out. Your teeth turn grey. Your gums recede. You get severe headaches. You get tremors. And finally, you die. The most famous beauty icon of the age was slowly poisoning herself to death every time she looked in the mirror. But it wasn't just the skin, it was the eyes. Large, dilated pupils were considered seductive. They made you look soft, dreamy, perhaps a little aroused. So Italian women used drops made from the Atropa belladonna plant. Belladonna means beautiful lady. It is also called deadly nightshade. You put the drops in your eyes, your pupils dilate, you look stunning. But the poison paralyzes the muscles in your eye. Over time, your vision blurs, you get sensitive to light, and eventually you go blind. You're literally trading your sight for a sultry stare. And hair removal? If you wanted a high forehead, which was very trendy, you didn't just shave your hairline. You used a cream made of quicklime and arsenic. If you left it on too long, it didn't just burn off the hair, it burned off the skin. Beauty was a battlefield. But men weren't immune to fashion disasters. Let's talk about the codpiece. In the Tudor era, men started wearing a pouch attached to the front of their hose. At first, it was practical, just a piece of fabric. But then, it became a flex. They started padding them, making them enormous, decorating them with jewels. Some were used as pockets to hold coins or handkerchiefs. It was the ultimate overcompensation, but the most dangerous male fashion wasn't the codpiece. It was the armour. We have this image of the knight in shining armour. Gallant. Invincible. Reality check. A knight in full plate armour is a canned human being. You're wearing 60 pounds of steel. Underneath you're wearing a padded jacket called a gambeson to stop the metal from chafing your skin off. It is hot. Unbelievably hot. If you fight in the summer, heatstroke is a bigger killer than the enemy. Knights have died of heart attacks just walking to the battle, and once you're in it, you are trapped. Battle of Agincourt 1415. It rained. The field was a ploughed muddy mess. The French knights charged. They were wearing heavy plate. They slipped in the mud. They fell down. They couldn't get up. The mud was deep. The knights behind them tripped over the fallen knights. They piled up. A wall of struggling, screaming metal. Many of them didn't die from sword wounds. They drowned. They drowned in 6 inches of mud because they were too heavy to lift their heads. Or they suffocated under the weight of their friends. The English archers, peasants with no armour, just walked up with hammers and daggers. They opened the visors of the trapped knights and ended it. This is the reality of chivalry. It wasn't noble duels, it was men suffocating in their own expensive suits. And speaking of chivalry, let's debunk that word. You hear chivalry is dead, and you think of holding doors open. The code of chivalry was not about being nice. It was a professional code of conduct for killers. It was about how to kill other knights without getting killed yourself. Rule 1. Don't kill a noble if you can capture him. Why? Because you can ransom him. A live knight is a winning lottery ticket. A dead knight is just scrap metal. Rule 2. You can do whatever you want to the peasants. Chivalry did not apply to the poor. A knight could burn a village, steal the crops and kill the farmers, and he was still considered chivalrous as long as he bowed to the opposing duke. Knights were essentially tanks with titles. They were the premier violence workers of the age, and they were terrified of one thing, the crossbow. The church tried to ban the crossbow. Why? Because it was unfair. A knight trains for 20 years. He buys a horse that costs as much as a village. He buys armour that cost a fortune, and then a peasant with a crossbow, who was trained for 2 weeks, can pull a trigger and punch a bolt straight through that armour from 200 yards away. It was the great equaliser. It broke the monopoly on violence. The aristocracy hated it because it meant they weren't gods anymore, they were targets. But let's leave the battlefield and go to the one place even a knight was afraid to go, the open ocean. We talked about the Vikings, but let's fast forward to the Age of Discovery. Columbus, Magellan, the great voyages. History books call it exploration. Sailors called it the floating hell. You sign up for a voyage. You're going to the Spice Islands. You will be rich. But first you have to survive the food. There is no refrigeration. You leave port with barrels of salted beef, salted pork and hardtack. Hardtack is a biscuit made of flour and water, baked until it is as hard as a brick. It is so hard you have to soak it in water or break it with a hammer before you can eat it. But you aren't the only one eating it. The weevils are there too. After a month at sea, the biscuits are crawling with beetle larvae. The sailors had a choice: eat the biscuit in the dark so you couldn't see the worms, or boil the biscuit and skim the dead worms off the top. The sailors called the biscuits worm castles. And the water? It turns green in the barrel. It grows algae. It smells like a swamp. You have to hold your nose to drink it. But the real horror isn't hunger. It's scurvy. We know today that scurvy is vitamin C deficiency. They didn't. They just knew that after 3 months at sea your body started to fall apart. It starts with lethargy. You feel tired. Then your gums swell. They turn black. They grow over your teeth. Your teeth get loose and fall out. Old wounds, cuts you got 10 years ago that healed, suddenly open up again. Your skin literally unheals itself. Your legs turn black. And the psychological effects? Nostalgia. Fatal nostalgia. Sailors would start hallucinating the smell of grass or the sound of church bells from their village. They would weep uncontrollably. And then, they died. Magellan lost 80% of his crew. Vasco da Gama lost 2/3. Imagine being on a ship where every day you throw another friend overboard, and you check your own gums in the reflection of a knife waiting for the black spots. Why did they do it? Spices, pepper, cloves, nutmeg. Nutmeg only grew on a tiny group of islands in Indonesia, the Banda Islands. In Europe, a pocketful of nutmeg was worth enough to buy a house. People believed nutmeg cured the plague. It didn't. But the belief was enough to drive men to sail off the edge of the map, eat worms and die of scurvy just to bring back a wrinkled little nut. It is the ultimate example of the disconnect between luxury and labour. The rich man sprinkles nutmeg on his wine, oblivious to the fact that a sailor's teeth fell out to get it there. But there is one job on the ship that is worse than the sailor: the galley slave. In the Mediterranean, ships weren't always powered by wind. They were powered by muscle. You are a prisoner. Or maybe you were captured by pirates. You are chained to a bench. You row. That is your life. You row for 10 hours, 12 hours, sometimes 20 hours if the captain is chasing someone. You eat at the bench. You sleep at the bench. You relieve yourself at the bench. The smell of a galley ship could be detected miles away downwind. If you stop rowing, the boatswain whips you. If you collapse, they throw you overboard. It was a human engine fueled by misery. And yet, these ships built empires. Venice, the Ottoman Empire, Spain, they floated on a sea of sweat. But let's step off the boat. Let's get back to dry land. And let's look at something that seems harmless: the garden. We think of gardens as peaceful, flowers, birds. But in the past, the garden was a pharmacy and a supermarket, and it was full of poisons. We mentioned the wise woman's herbs, but even a regular garden had danger. Monkshood, aconite, beautiful purple flowers. The roots look like parsnips. If you eat them by mistake, your heart stops. Mandrake. The root looks like a little human. The legend said that when you pull it up, it screams, and if you hear the scream, you die. So how do you harvest it? You tie a dog to the plant. You throw a piece of meat just out of reach. The dog runs for the meat, pulls up the plant, hears the scream, and dies. Spoiler: the dog didn't die from a scream. It probably just got confused, but the legend kept people from stealing your valuable mandrake. And then there was ergot. This wasn't a plant. It was a fungus that grew on rye. Rye was the poor man's wheat. If the summer was damp, the rye got infected with purple spurs. The peasant grinds the rye, makes bread, eats it. A few days later, the whole village goes mad. St. Anthony's fire, that's what they called it. Your limbs feel like they are burning. You hallucinate. You see demons. You convulse. Your fingers and toes turn black and fall off, gangrene. Entire villages would be struck by mass hysteria. They would dance in the streets until they collapsed. They would accuse each other of witchcraft. Historians think the Salem witch trials might have been caused by a bad batch of rye bread. The girls who had fits, they might have just been tripping on mouldy fungus. History is often just biology in disguise. But amidst the poison and the plague, there were moments of incredible ingenuity. Let's talk about ice. Before the refrigerator, how did a king have ice cream in the summer? Ice houses. In the winter, you cut giant blocks of ice from a frozen lake. You drag them to a deep pit lined with straw and brick. You pack the ice in, you cover it. If you build it right, that ice will last until August. The Emperor Nero famously made runners sprint from the mountains with snow so he could have a cold drink. But the Persians, they built yakhchals, giant cone-shaped structures in the desert. Through brilliant engineering of wind catchers and evaporation, they could make ice in the middle of the desert. It is a reminder that people, in the past, weren't stupid. They were just working with different tools. They built cathedrals without calculators. They navigated oceans without GPS. They performed cataract surgery with needles. Yes, really, they pushed the cloudy lens into the eye. It worked about 40% of the time, which is better than 0%. But as we near the end of our journey, we have to look at the one thing that connects us all. The one thing that hasn't changed. The fear of being forgotten. Walk through a medieval graveyard. You won't see many headstones. Headstones cost money. Most people were buried in the earth, wrapped in a shroud. After a few years, when the graveyard was full, the sexton would dig up the bones. He would take the skull and the long bones and stack them in the charnel house or ossuary to make room for new bodies. Your bones would be mixed with your neighbours', your identity erased. This terrified people. The idea of the anonymous dead, so they paid for chantry chapels. They paid priests to pray for their souls forever. Pray for the soul of John Smith, every day, until the end of the world. They left money in their wills. Here is 100 gold coins, say my name. But then came the Reformation. The chantry chapels were closed, the prayers stopped. John Smith was forgotten. It is a sobering thought. We build statues, we write books, we make videos, all to say, I was here. But history is a grinder. It turns kings into dust and castles into ruins. Yet there is something beautiful in it. Because even if we don't know their names, we're here because of them. You are alive because a peasant survived the winter. You're alive because a sailor survived the scurvy. You're alive because a midwife washed her hands. You are the victory of their survival. So, tonight, as you drift off to sleep, listen to the wind. It's the same wind that howled through the Wattle and Daub. It's the same wind that filled the Viking sail. You are part of the chain, and you are the lucky one. You are the one who gets to be warm. We have walked the streets, sailed the seas, and survived the dinner table. But now we need to talk about work, real work, not the noble profession of a knight or the holy calling of a monk. We are going to talk about the jobs that made the medieval world function, but which destroyed the people doing them. You're looking for a job, you have no land, you have no trade, so you end up in the district of the city that everyone else avoids. The district that is always positioned downwind, so the smell blows away from the cathedral. You're going to become a tanner. Leather is the plastic of the Middle Ages. Shoes, belts, saddles, armour, buckets, jerkins, everything is made of leather. But turning a dead cow's skin into a usable belt is a chemical nightmare. You walk into the tannery. The smell hits you instantly, a mixture of rotting flesh and old ammonia. Your job is to clean the hides. First, you have to get the hair off. How do you do that? You soak the skins in vats of urine, but not just any urine, stale urine. Urine that has been sitting in a pot for weeks until the ammonia concentrates. It was so valuable that people would leave pots out on the street for passers-by to use, so the tanners could collect it. The Romans even taxed it. You spend your day knee-deep in a vat of cold pea, stomping on cow skins. Your skin absorbs it. You smell like it. You will never ever get that smell out. But that's just step one. Once the hair is off, you have to soften the leather. You need something stronger than urine. You need enzymes. You need dog poop. It was called pure, and collecting it was an actual job. Pure finders would roam the streets with buckets, scooping up dog droppings to sell to the tanners. You take the pure, mix it with warm water, and rub it into the leather with your bare hands. This is called baiting. It makes the leather soft and supple. It also means your hands are constantly covered in bacterial sludge. If you have a cut on your finger, gangrene. You're the backbone of the economy. The knight cannot ride without his saddle. The scholar cannot bind his book without leather. But if you walk into a tavern, people move away. You are necessary, but you are untouchable. But perhaps you want a cleaner job. You decide to work in the cloth trade. You become a fuller. Wool is greasy. It comes off the sheep filled with lanolin and dirt. Before it can be dyed, it has to be cleaned. How do you clean it? You put the wool in a vat of, you guessed it, stale urine and fuller's earth, a type of clay. And then you get in. You walk all day long. You march in place in a tub of pea and clay, trampling the wool to clean it. It's called walking the cloth. Your legs swell, your feet rot. The ammonia burns your lungs. But the cloth comes out white and soft, ready for the king's robes. The luxury of the rich is built on the biological waste of the poor. But let's leave the smell behind. Let's talk about pain. You have a toothache. We discussed that. But what if you have something worse? What if you have a shattered leg or a gangrenous arm? You need a surgeon. But in the Middle Ages, surgeon is not a prestigious title. Physicians went to university. They looked at your urine and quoted Aristotle. Surgeons were manual labourers. They were butchers who worked on people. You go to the barber surgeon. The red and white pole outside his shop symbolises blood and bandages. He sits you down. There is no anaesthesia. Maybe a sponge soaked in opium and mandrake if you're rich. The soporific sponge. But usually it's just a stick to bite on and 4 strong men to hold you down. He has to be fast. Speed is the only metric that matters. A good surgeon can amputate a leg in under a minute. He takes a curved knife. He cuts through the flesh in one sweep. He takes a saw. He cuts the bone. The sound of the saw grating against your own femur is something you will never forget. And then, the bleeding. He can't stitch the arteries fast enough, so he uses the cautery iron. A piece of iron, heated until it is glowing red. He presses it against the raw stump. Sizzle. The smell of your own cooking flesh fills the room. The pain is absolute. It overrides your brain. You pass out. If you wake up, you face the next danger. Laudable pus. Doctors believed that pus was a sign of healing. They wanted the wound to get infected, but only with specific creamy white pus. If it didn't get infected, they thought something was wrong. They might actually put irritating substances into the wound to cause pus. They were literally inviting the infection in. If you survived an amputation in the Middle Ages, you were practically immortal. But physical pain is one thing, psychological terror is another. Let's talk about the Inquisition. We have a cartoon image of the Inquisition. Racks, iron maidens, men in red robes laughing. The reality was a bureaucracy of fear. You're a regular person. Maybe you live in southern France during the Cathar heresy, or Spain in the 15th century. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be accused. The Inquisitor arrives in town. He preaches a sermon. He announces the period of grace. If you confess now, you will be treated leniently. Neighbours start looking at neighbours. Did John say something weird about the Trinity last week? Does Mary light candles on Saturday? People confess to save themselves, but to show they are truly repentant, they have to name names. I am a heretic, but so is John. Fear spreads like a virus. If you are arrested, you're put in a dungeon. You're not told who accused you. You're not told the specific evidence. You're just told to confess the truth. They wait. Isolation is the first torture. Then they bring you to the torture chamber, but they don't start immediately. They show you the instruments, the strappado, a rope that pulls your arms out of their sockets, the rack. They explain, in calm, clinical detail, what each one does. This is the torture of the imagination. Many people broke just looking at the tools. If you confess, you might be burned at the stake. This is the auto da fe, the act of faith. It is a public spectacle. You are dressed in a San Benito, a yellow sack painted with flames and demons. You walk through the city. The crowd jeers. Being burned alive is not quick. If the wood is dry and the wind is high, you die of smoke inhalation. If the wood is green, you cook. But the Inquisition wasn't just about killing. It was about control. It was about making sure that no one, anywhere, dared to think a thought that wasn't approved. It was the thought police, 500 years before Orwell. But let's step back from the edge of the fire. Let's look at something mundane. something we check 100 times a day. Time. You don't have a watch. You don't have a phone. How do you know what time it is? You don't. You live in church time. The bells ring every 3 hours, but the length of an hour changes. In the summer, the days are long, so a daytime hour might be 80 minutes long. In the winter, the days are short, so an hour might be 40 minutes. Time is elastic. It stretches and shrinks with the sun. You don't say, "I'll meet you at 4:15. You say, "I'll meet you around Vespers." This makes people patient. If you wait 3 hours for a friend, you don't get angry. You just wait. What else is there to do? But then, in the 14th century, something clicks. The mechanical clock. Suddenly, time is rigid. Tick-tock. It doesn't care about the sun. It doesn't care about the season. An hour is an hour is an hour. Merchants love it. Time is money. Now they can pay you by the hour. Now they can fine you for being late. The clock tower rises in the town square. It is a machine that rules your life. You stop looking at the sky. You start looking at the dial. We are still living in that trap. We are the children of the mechanical clock. But what about money? You think you know money. Coins, bills, credit cards. In the Middle Ages, money was a mess. There were hundreds of currencies. Every duke, every bishop, every city could mint their own coins. You go to the market, you have a handful of silver pennies. But are they real silver? The king needs money for a war, so he debases the currency. He mixes copper into the silver. The coins look the same, but they are worth less. This is inflation. Suddenly your bread costs 2 pennies instead of 1. You don't understand economics. You just know you are starving. And there are clippers. People who take a pair of shears and clip the tiny edges off silver coins. They save the clippings, melt them down and sell the silver. The coins in your pocket get smaller and smaller. They look like jagged little shrapnel. If you're caught clipping, they boil you in oil. It is considered treason against the king's face on the coin. But the most dangerous money wasn't the coin. It was the tally stick. This was a piece of wood. You make notches in it to represent a debt. John owes me £10. Then you split the stick down the middle. John keeps half, the foil. You keep half, the stock. Hence the term stockholder. When John pays, you put the sticks together. If the notches match, the debt is real. It was a credit card made of willow wood. The British government used these until 1826. When they finally decided to burn the old sticks, they put them in the furnace of the Houses of Parliament. They burned so hot that they accidentally burned down the entire Palace of Westminster. The British government literally burned down its own Capitol building trying to get rid of medieval paperwork. History is often hilarious, provided it isn't happening to you. But let's end this chapter with a look at the social ladder. We assume that if you were a peasant, you were stuck. But there was one escape hatch. One way to get rich, quick. War. If you were a strong peasant boy with a bow, you could join the army as a mercenary. You go to France. You fight in the 100 Years' War. If you capture a French knight, you win the lottery. You don't kill him. You take his armour. You take his horse. And you demand a ransom. A French noble might be worth 10,000 crowns. That's enough to buy a manor house. Enough to become a gentleman. There are stories of butchers and tanners who went to war, captured a count, and came home richer than their own lord. It was the American dream, but with more stabbing. However, if you lost, if you were a peasant archer and the French caught you, they didn't ransom you. You were worthless to them. They cut off your fingers, specifically the 2 fingers you used to draw the bowstring. This is allegedly the origin of the V sign insult, showing the enemy you still have your fingers. So, the gamble was high. Win a fortune or lose your hands. Life was a casino where the house always had a sword. You lie in your bed at the end of the day. You can hear the rats in the thatch. You can smell the tanneries down the street. You can feel the flea biting your ankle. But you are alive. You have navigated the sewage, the law, the church, and the economy. You have survived the doctor's knife and the inquisitor's question. You are a survivor. And tomorrow, the bell will ring, and you will do it all again. Because the only alternative is the grave, and we all know how crowded that is. We have spent this journey looking at the mud on your boots and the lice in your hair. We have looked at the world through the eyes of a doctor with a dirty knife and a judge with a hot iron. But as the sun sets on the medieval world, there is one final thing we must confront. The end. Not just your death, the death of everything. If you are a medieval person, you do not believe the world will go on forever. You believe, with absolute certainty, that the apocalypse is coming. Probably next Tuesday. You look at the sky. Is the moon a little too red? That's a sign. Is there a two-headed calf born in the next village? That's a sign. Did the king trip over his own robe? Definitely a sign. You live in a state of constant low-level existential dread. You believe the Antichrist is already here, usually the Pope you don't like or the King of France. You see it on the walls of the church, the doom paintings. You walk into your local parish. Above the arch there is a massive mural. On one side, people are naked, rising from their graves, looking fit and happy, going up to heaven. On the other side, demons. Demons with faces on their stomachs. Demons boiling people in pots. Demons eating sinners and, well, excreting them out. It is graphic. It is terrifying. And you stare at it every single Sunday. But there is another image that is even more popular, one that captures the true spirit of the age, the danse macabre, the dance of death. You see it painted on the walls of the cemetery in Paris, or London, or Basel. It is a long line of dancers, a skeleton, then a pope, then a skeleton, then a king, then a skeleton, then a merchant, then a skeleton, then a peasant. The skeletons are smiling, they are dancing, they are taking the hands of the living and leading them into the grave. To us this looks morbid. To you, the peasant, it is the most comforting image in the world. Why? Because it is the great equalizer. You look at the king in the painting. He looks terrified. He doesn't want to go. He offers the skeleton his gold. The skeleton just grins. You realise that no matter how rich the lord is, no matter how high the castle walls are, he is going to end up just like you, rotting in the ground. Death is the only true democracy. In a world of rigid hierarchy where you are born a serf and die a serf, the dance of death is a promise of justice. You may rule me in life, my lord, but in the grave we are the same. It gives you a strange sense of peace. You don't fear the skeleton. You almost welcome him. He's the only one who doesn't care about your taxes, and as you stand there, looking at the painted bones, the sun finally dips below the horizon. The curfew bell rings one last time. Clang, clang. Cover your fires. You walk back to your hut. You step over the gutter. You ignore the smell. You're used to it now. You open the door. The animals look up. The fire is banking down to a soft red glow. You take off your shoes. You lie down on the straw. And now I want you to do something. I want you to leave the hut. Open your eyes, or keep them closed. But leave 1350 behind. Feel the bed you're lying in right now. It isn't straw. It isn't full of bugs. It is soft. It is clean. Feel the air in the room. It isn't freezing. It isn't smoky. It is controlled. You are the master of your climate. Listen to the silence. No wolves, no screaming watchmen, no coughing neighbours through the wall. Just the quiet hum of a world that has solved the problems of the past. You don't have to wake up in 4 hours to stoke the fire. You don't have to worry that a Viking is going to kick down your door. You don't have to worry that your water is poisoned or your bread is full of chalk. You are the heir to all of their suffering. They walked through the mud so you could walk on pavement. They ate the rot so you could eat the fresh. They endured the pain so you could have the pill. Every comfort you have, the light, the heat, the safety, was paid for by them. By the millions of nameless people who lived, worked and died in the dark. They are gone. Their cities are ruins, their castles are museums. But you are here. You are the victory. So as you drift off to sleep, let the weight of history fall away. You have survived the tour. You have seen the worst of it. Now you get to enjoy the best of it. Sleep. Sleep without fear. Sleep without cold. Sleep knowing that the fire is out, the door is locked, and the night belongs to you. Good night.